This video is sponsored by Babbel. Bonjour, je m'appelle Elizabeth. Elizabeth, whatever are you doing? Oh, hello, Elizabeth. What is that strange contraption in your hand? Well, swear this is a secret, but I found this in Mr. Farcy's waistcoat at your ball last night. Oh, that was a splendid ball, if I do say so myself. I don't. So what in heavens are you doing? Well, you know how much I long to see the world. And I heard at the ball that Mrs. Jennings is sending Mr. Farcy to France. And since Mr. Farcy is on the precipice of proposing to me, I thought I would get a head start to learn the language of the French. And how is that small device to help you in that endeavour, pray tell? Well, I came across an app. An app? An app. And it's called Babbel. Babbel? Yes, Babbel, shut up. Babbel is the language learning app that helps you with learning any language you so please. This app is designed to be quick and efficient, so having short 10-minute interactive lessons means I can squeeze in as many lessons as possible before Mr. Farcy realises his communications device is missing. Can you show me? Oh, why certainly. So all you do is click on the Babbel application. Be sure to click on your lesson. Now this is just a first example, but as you can see, it's perfect for beginners. Can you guess the meaning au revoir? Goodbye. Oh, ça va? I think that is, how's it going? Bonjour, hello. And it does have quite a range of activities and things you can do in order to help you to remember certain words that are in a different language that you are trying to remember. So bonjour, hello, ça va? How's it going? And au revoir. And there are so many more things that you can do. Astonishing! The lessons are designed by real language teachers. Do you recall as children when our teacher would venture to teach us French? Vaguely. I remember she was of little use as all my French is forgotten. Well, Babbel is quite the opposite. The lessons have really been sticking. Listen to this. Elisabeth n'aura jamais de mari pas, qu'elle est assez simple, qu'elle n'est mon visage. And what does that mean? You're beautiful. Oh. My pronunciation is not yet up to par, but Babbel has speech recognition, which will help me with that and my accent, so that when I go to France with Mr. Farcy, I will fit right in. May I see that? Of course. Oh. You can start speaking a new language in 3 weeks with Babbel, and you can get 65% off your subscription if you click the link in the description box. Where are you going? Oh, did I not tell you? Mr. Farcy has asked me to accompany him to France. This Babbel application will be perfect for my own study of language. And look at that. I've just clicked the link in the description box and I just got 65% off my subscription. I can't believe you would take Mr. Farcy away from me and my Babbel subscription. Au revoir. Oh, 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 oh. Hi everyone, welcome back to How to Train Your Gavin. It's time for another complete series vlog, and in this one I'm going to be doing something different to what I did with my Goosebumps, Animorphs, Pretty Little Liars, Heartstopper, all of the other series that I've done. This time I'm focusing on an author, and this is an author who I have read from before, but I haven't read their most popular works. I've only read a couple of their books, and I am so excited to be diving into all of their books because I will be rereading the ones I've already read. Now, I do know that Jane Austen's books are not a series, they are all standalone books, but I just want to fit it in with my series. Too hot. I don't even know how to get started anymore. What is BookTube? How do I film? Yes, Jane Austen. So, all the books that I have that I'm planning on reading in this video, actually, there's another one somewhere, damn. Well, the ones that I own physically are right here, these ones. I have all of the Jane Austen books, and I do have a couple more on the Kindle. Now, I do have this gorgeous copy of Jane Austen's 7 novels. However, it's a little bit unreadable, not gonna lie. So I'm not gonna actually read this one, but I will use it for aesthetic purposes. So putting this one down. Here are the 7 Jane Austen novels that I want to read in this vlog, and there are 2 additional ones that I would like to read for this vlog as well. So let's go into the novels then. The novels that I want to read for this vlog are Emma, and I have read this one before. I read it a couple of years ago, and I really love it. It's probably my favourite Jane Austen book that I've read so far, so I'm really looking forward to rereading this. Mansfield Park, which I explained in my August TBR video that I was supposed to read this for uni, but I never did, and yet I still managed to pass that class. Northanger Abbey, which I have also read and really enjoyed because I absolutely love gothic fiction, and I love the fact that Jane Austen takes the mick out of gothic fiction. So yeah, this one will be a reread for me. Persuasion by I don't need to say who it's by. Persuasion, and I did read this one for uni, however, I've forgotten everything that happened in it. So I definitely need a reread of this one. Pride and Prejudice, which I have not read. Sanditon, which is an incomplete novel, but I still wanted to include it in this vlog. And Sense and Sensibility, which again, I have not read. And there are actually 3 extra books that I would like to read, and they are Lady Susan, which was written long before all of her other books, I believe, but it wasn't actually published until 1871, and it's a short epistolary novel, and it is included in this collection here, but as I said, this book is quite unreadable. The gilded pages are stuck together, and the writing is tiny, and yeah, it might be pretty, but it's not very practical. Like me. So I have Lady Susan on the Kindle ready to go, but I also have The Watsons, which is another story that was unfinished from Jane Austen. I believe she wrote it in the early 1800s, and she stopped writing it for some reason. I don't know why. I don't really know a lot about Jane Austen or her books, so anything I say in this video might be right, might be wrong. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. And yeah, those are like the only 2 extra books. Sanditon was also unfinished, but it's kind of been published as a proper novel now and stuff. I'm not going to be reading any of Jane Austen's juvenilia or her poems or her plays, any of that. I'm keeping it strictly to novels, whether they're finished or not. So that is 9 stories, and I'm going to tell you in which order I will be reading them, because I do have an order I would like to read them. So I actually want to read Persuasion first, because the new film's just come out on Netflix. I'm going to be watching it as a movie night with my patrons this Sunday. So I really want to read this before we watch the film. And yeah, I feel like once I read this, it might start bringing back memories of me reading it at uni. I don't know, but it will be really cool to try it out and see if I end up enjoying it, and then I can watch that. Well, apparently it's a really god-awful movie, so we'll see. So Persuasion will be first. And I was going to go in like order of how she wrote these books so I can kind of look at how she progressed as a writer. But I just want to read Persuasion, and this was like one of her last ones, and I just didn't want to wait that long, okay? And then I will be reading Sense and Sensibility. This is one of her most popular ones, and again, I have never read it. And then I will be reading Mansfield Park, and finally right the wrongs of not reading it at uni. Then smack bang in the middle, I will reread Emma, and I'm really excited to reread this because I genuinely did love it when I first read it. So, oh gosh, get me back into this story. And I'm dying. I'm absolutely dying to read Pride and Prejudice, so I will be reading that after Emma. Again, another really, really popular Jane Austen book, if not her most acclaimed book. I don't know, it's between this one and Sense and Sensibility, I think. And then I will reread Northanger Abbey, and then that will be like her kind of finished novels, all completed. Then I will go into the extras, the unfinished novels, and the epistolary novel. So I will probably read Lady Susan first out of those, and then I will go into the Watsons, and then I will end with Sanditon, I think. Yeah, I think this is a good one to end on. And then I will rank all of Jane Austen's stories at the end of this video, so make sure you stick around to see that. And don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you haven't already. That would be amazing. And yeah, I think that's the intro. All the timestamps will be down in the description box for all of these books, so if you want to skip to a certain part, if you want to hear me talk about your favourite book, then you absolutely can do that. I think I will be talking about spoilers as well. I will go in depth with these books like I do with my other complete series vlogs. Otherwise, I think it would be really hard to talk about these books without giving those spoilers and going in depth with them. So do bear that in mind if you do want to read any of these Jane Austen books and you haven't read it yet. Maybe skip the part where I talk about that book. I'm so excited to take this Jane Austen journey with you. So buckle up, bitches, we're going classic. I'm halfway through this and I am really enjoying it. I usually am very scared to read classics. They give me the heebie-jeebies, but I'm reading this as slowly as possible, and I feel like I could have finished this by now if this had just been a normal book, but because it's a classic, I'm taking my sweet time with it. I've just finished part 1, so I'm halfway through. I'm on page 119, and yeah, not a single thing is coming back to me after reading it at uni, so I feel like this is just me reading it for the first time, essentially. Well, we do follow Anne, and about 9 years before, she was in love with Frederick Wentworth, and Anne is from like this very wealthy family, and Frederick, he doesn't really have very good social standing at the time, and so Anne was persuaded by a distant relative, Lady Russell, to call off the engagement. Anne's own father is against the engagement, and Elizabeth, who is Anne's older sister, is against the engagement. Anne does have another sister called Mary, but anyway, nobody wanted her to be engaged to Wentworth, so Anne ends up calling it off. And you can really feel through Anne's kind of inner monologues, and even just the way that the narrator tells us the story, that Anne is so regretful that she did that. So yeah, this is 9 years later, and she is remorseful about being persuaded, which I now understand the title of this book now, Persuasion, to call it off with somebody who she really did love. So I do really like the character of Anne, and look, I've even like highlighted quite a bit of it in purple. Well, I say it quite a bit. I only ever highlight, I never sort of properly annotate, but I have been highlighting things. So yeah, I like the way the character's introduced. Anne is introduced as having elegance of mind and sweetness of character, and out of the sisters, she seems to be the more nicer one and the more approachable one. Elizabeth seems quite insufferable. Mary also seems to be a little bit hot-headed. But yeah, the way they talk about Anne, I felt so bad for her, because at the start, her father says that he finds little to admire in her, and even Elizabeth doesn't seem to well, even Mary as well. They don't seem to have a very good sisterly relationship. Although I guess it's probably normal in this kind of day and age to maybe have those kinds of prejudices against your siblings. Lady Russell also kind of reminds me of the Dowager Countess in Downton Abbey, with her kind of need to be honest, even though it is kind of rude. Although at this point in time, her opinions and her prejudices are kind of widely accepted in society. So I guess it's like fine, but again, like she was the kind of main contributor in getting Frederick and Anne to kind of split up, which is quite dramatic really when you think about it. Like, I really do like how, because, you know, now Frederick Wentworth has like come back from war, he's like a lot more of a respectable man, he has his own little fortune and stuff, so like he's really turned himself around. But now you see kind of between the interactions of like Anne and Frederick, like how much Anne regrets what she did, and it eats away at her, and she's even like depressed at moments when she recalls how she let him get away. Like even just when they're kind of almost like forced together, and by the way, Frederick Wentworth is now called Captain Wentworth, and I'm not gonna lie, like that's a little bit hot. So I'm kind of really digging the vibe between Captain Wentworth and Anne, because it's just a bit like, will they, won't they, will they get back together? I don't actually know. I genuinely cannot remember a single thing about this. But yeah, they had no conversation together when they've been like in the same circles, and then there had been a time they would have found it most difficult to cease to speak to one another. So they had all of this stuff to say to one another 9 years before. They were pretty much inseparable. They always had conversation flowing, and now they're kind of forced together in these same circles, and they have nothing that they can say to one another, even though I think you can really feel that they do actually want to say a lot to one another, especially since, again, a lot of Anne's inner reflections show a lot of remorse. So yeah, it does seem to be that he had not forgiven Anne Elliot, she had used him ill, deserted and disappointed him. He had been most warmly attached to her and had never seen a woman since whom he thought her equal. So he still has like that love there, and like, oh, you can just tell how much they want to be back together. And really, it's just, I kind of need them to get back together. It would be amazing. So yeah, we have been introduced to a lot of other people in this kind of village, this society. There's also Louisa as well, who is a friend. And then actually, just before part 1 ended, there was kind of a bit of a dramatic moment, probably a bit over dramatic, where Louisa falls down some stairs, and like everyone's like, oh my god, she's dead. Literally, Captain Wentworth like goes to pick her up and, you know, feels for her pulse and stuff, and Mary screams, she's dead, and it says that she was taken up lifeless, she breathed not, her face was like death, but she does stir and she is alive. But it's just like the way people react to it is just so over dramatic. But like at the same time, I can kind of see why, because there aren't really like ambulances or 999 or 911 in this kind of time period. So when somebody has a fall like that, even though there was like no visible wound and I don't think there was any blood seen, it was still quite scary because she was unconscious. Everyone reacted, I guess, the way they would in that time period. And also, I'm drinking like this little latte caramel macchiato thing I bought from the shop. Really cheap, and it was actually really tasty, so can't fault that. Now, I did study a lot of literature that came from around about this time period and from before and after, and heroines of books are usually seen as like not as sensible because they're overcome with sensibility a lot of the time, and they seem to be more kind of placed in a way that makes them look useless. But Anne is incredible. Like, during this whole over-dramatic scene, she is the one who's quite level-headed. She is telling people what to do. She is kind of controlling the situation in such a steady way that really makes me admire her all the more. And even other people are impressed by the way she handles the situation. So she really does challenge the notion that, and this was brought up even earlier on in the book as well, about something about ships and things, and was it Captain Wentworth it might have been Captain Wentworth. He was a bit of a sexist dick, not gonna lie. He was saying about how he would never allow women or children on his ship because they would not be comfortable and like it wouldn't be suitable for women to be on the ship. And somebody does challenge him, I can't remember who it was, but somebody challenges him and says, oh yeah, I've been on voyages before and you'll be surprised like what women can put up with. So like that was challenged, and I feel like Wentworth is just saying things to be a dick purposefully because he's hurt, and he's hurting still from what Anne did to him 9 years before. But yeah, we have this idea in this society which has been challenged that women are useless or they are not as useful as men. But in this situation, we see the total reverse of that. Even Captain Wentworth is a little bit senseless and doesn't know what to do. But Anne, she is like, let's go lesbians, let's go. You know, she knows what to do. And I love that. Honestly, I really dig in Anne. I really love Anne as a character. And I do think Captain Wentworth has been acting out of character and being a bit of a dick, out of hurt, out of spite. So I'm hoping that that isn't the real Wentworth, that the real Wentworth is a nice man who appreciates women and sees their strength and their worth and will, you know, fall back in love with Anne, which I do think he's still in love with Anne. I really do. And it'll be really interesting to see if they get it on. Oh, also, can I just say, the word intercourse is used quite a lot. And I know it's not in the way that I'm thinking, but it's like there was a line or something like intercourse between the family. My mind is not equipped with this. But I swear the word intercourse was used about 4 or 5 times in part 1. And each time I was like, okay, I get it because this is written like 200 years ago, but still. Ugh. So yeah, I am really enjoying it. And again, classics I usually struggle with, but because I've slowed myself down, I'm really taking it in. I'm enjoying this more than I thought I would. It just makes me all the more excited to read the rest of Jane Austen's books too. So, I've already got part 2 to read. I have, 130 pages? So I'm going to spend the rest of today reading this. And I cannot wait for my movie night for Persuasion tomorrow. Honestly, it's going to be hilarious. I feel a bit protective of this book now. So if I don't like this movie, I'm going to be pissed. I finished. I'm so happy that Anne and Wentworth got together. Like, they got back together after so long. Like, that's what should have happened the entire time. Like, they wasted 9 years. They wasted 9 years apart. My voice broke there. Am I emotional? So I love that. I thought that was so good. Honestly, I'm so happy. So happy they got together. I don't think there's actually that much more I can talk about with this one because I thought part 2 was actually kind of a bit dull at times. Like, yes, my ship, they came a-coming. Other than that, I feel like with the other characters, I didn't really care as much. There were other proposals, there were other, like, weddings and things, but, like, I just didn't really care too much. And I am really glad that, like, people like Lady Russell, for instance, finally accepted Anne and Wentworth, and, you know, that was really nice to see. It really showed a lot of progress in that society. And just saying, like, people be happy, just seeing love win, it's just so good. Saying that though, I would probably only give this maybe like 3.5 stars. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to actually rate it until maybe after I finish reading all of them so I can compare and contrast them all together. At the minute, I do think that it started off a lot stronger than it did in the second part, and I was really invested. I really liked the character of Anne. I thought she was a great protagonist. Really enjoyed the kind of tension between her and Wentworth and them kind of having this history and seeing if they would get back together. That was so good. But yeah, that is my first read for this vlog done. And do let me know in the comments as well. Let me know everything about your favourite Jane Austen books and maybe your thoughts on each book. I would love to know what you think of Persuasion and the books that are coming up in this vlog. Let me know everything down below. I would love to chat. So far, so good. So 1 book down, 8 more to go, I think. Going live in 10 minutes with my patrons to watch Persuasion. I'm so ready. I'm so excited. Wait, I said that in the wrong order. I haven't touched my wine yet. I do have wine. In 10 minutes, I will click live and we're going to chat for half an hour. This is what we usually do with my movie nights. We chat for half an hour and then we press play on the film at the same time. I mute myself and we just chat in the live chat about it. Have a break halfway through, talk about the movie so far, and continue. Just started doing true crime and wine nights as well. We had our first one last Sunday, and it was so much fun. But that is also a bad thing because I'm drinking a lot of wine, which, to be fair, I'm not really that mad at. Anyway, I am ready for Persuasion, and I will let you know what I think of it, and hopefully, I love it. Okay, so I didn't love the film. It was a fun time. Watching it with my patrons was the best thing I could have done to watch that film, and to watch it with wine as well. It was just tonally a little bit all over the place. I don't mind modernizing it a little bit and having the whole kind of breaking the fourth wall thing. That was absolutely fine. And I mean, I'm not really going to like spoil the film, even though if you're watching this right now, you probably already know what happens in Persuasion and you just want my thoughts on the film. So breaking the fourth wall thing, it works every now and then, but it was pushed so much, it got a little bit repetitive, and it was used sometimes at parts where I just didn't feel like it fit. Anne as a character as well was not as engrossing as she is in the book. She came across as quite adorable, and the chemistry between her and Wentworth was pretty non-existent. I wasn't the biggest fan of Wentworth in the film. I definitely rooted more for them in the book than I did in the film. And I totally forgot about the whole cousin thing in the second half. Like, when I reviewed the last part of Persuasion yesterday, I was mainly just, like, talking about my thoughts on the very end and the fact that Anne and Wentworth do get back together, and I was happy about that. But I read the second part of Persuasion just on an enjoyment level. I didn't highlight much of it. So I just kind of I must have just glossed over a lot of the cousin stuff. But yeah, does anyone else find that cousin stuff a little bit weird? But it turned out that the person playing the cousin had a lot more chemistry with Dakota Johnson. So that was a bit awkward. So the fact that I kind of shipped her with her cousin was a little bit... And I loved Mary. Mary was like the best part of the film. She was hilarious. I mean, a terrible person, yes. But hilarious, also yes. But overall, it wasn't a great film. I don't think I would ever rewatch it. I feel like I'm going to try and watch at least one adaptation of each book once I've finished them. So I do want to watch an adaptation of Sense and Sensibility when I'm done. And my patrons were telling me that the one with Emma Thompson is a really good one. So I just discovered it's on Prime. It's on Amazon Prime, ready to watch. So once I finish this, I will give that a watch. But that's my thought on the film. It wasn't a great film. I mean, I have more thoughts on it, but I talked more about it with my patrons in the comments in the chat. And right now, I'm just like a little bit fucked off the wine, not gonna lie. I need to lie down. I need to lie down. Why did nobody tell me how scandalous this is? It's so scandalous. I freaking love this. And I feel like I'm reading a bit too much Austen at the minute because I'm starting to speak a little bit too posh. So I was talking to my cats before and I just randomly said, oh gosh, I'm feeling rather famished. And then I just stopped myself and I was like, hang on, well, firstly, one, why am I talking to my cats? And two, famished? I never say that word. Anyway, love this. I think I'm probably going to give it 4 stars because I kind of want to say, again, what the other ones are like. And I still think I prefer Emma, which I gave 5 stars. Let's talk through this then. So, yeah, I really enjoyed it. Love the characters of Eleanor and Marianne. And I just love the whole, like, scandalousness of it. A lot goes on in it. When I compare it to Persuasion, for instance, like, a lot goes on. So, to begin with, Eleanor and Marianne, they have another sister who we just don't talk about, just too young. Eleanor and Marianne. Eleanor is the one with the sense, and Marianne is the one with the sensibility. That's kind of like their shtick. And so their mum has married somebody, but she is his second wife. So the man she married, he has a son, and when that man dies, his son gets quite a bit in the will, and the father who died tells his son to look after his half-sisters, who are like Marianne and Eleanor. And yet we have our first villain. We have our first fucking villain, okay? And her name is Fanny. And she convinces her husband to not give Marianne and Eleanor, or like that side of the family, kind of any money to help them buy, even though John, who is the son, promised that he would look after his half-sisters. But yeah, Fanny, his wife, convinces him otherwise. Like, she is such a master manipulator. Yeah, literally, like, she keeps saying, oh, why don't you make it less than what he wanted to give? Because he was, like, so happy to give them some money and, like, to help them. But she cuts it down, like, £500, and then even more. And then she manages to convince him the assistance he thought of, I dare say, was only such a might be reasonably expected of you. For instance, such as looking out for a comfortable small house for them, helping them to move their things, and sending them presents of fish and game and so forth whenever they are in season. So essentially she's like telling him to kick them out, and the gullible bastard does that. Well, he doesn't like kick them out per se, but like he ends up like not helping them, which, oh my god, Fanny, I could never trust a Fanny, in all honesty. And then Marianne, Eleanor, and their mum, they go to Barton Cottage, and that's where they stay. And it's a really nice cottage and things. And then this is when, like, all the scandalous stuff starts to happen, because this is when we start to really get are heroes. We did meet Edward Ferrars, who is the person that Eleanor falls in love with, but he's not really a big, huge part of the start of the book. Mainly, the main romance at the start of the book is between Marianne and Willoughby. So we do have Colonel Brandon, who really fancies Marianne, right? But he's a little bit older and she's a little bit snobbish. Marianne's a bit like, well, he's a bit past his prime, isn't he? But then one day when she's out on a walk, Marianne falls over, which is hilarious. She falls and hurts her ankle, and who so happens to help but Willoughby? This strapping young stranger picks her up and carries her to the cottage to help, and it's the first time she's laid eyes on him. And honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I was swept off my feet as well. Like, I would have dropped my pants for Willoughby right there and then. And he just comes across as such a charming, charismatic hero. Oh, he's a little dick. Oh, he is awful. He is... Oh, like, when I was reading more of this, I was like, okay, I hate him, but I love reading about him, you know? So Willoughby and Marianne are, like, getting, like, really close and stuff. And then, out of nowhere, Willoughby kind of just, like, brushes her aside. He says he has to go away indefinitely or whatever, and then just never responds to Marianne's letters. And at this time, I was like, what is going on? Like, what's happened? Like, why is he not responding? What's happened? And then it turns out he's actually engaged to somebody else. And he just cast Marianne aside. And even though they were saying, oh, well, Marianne and Willoughby were never engaged officially or anything, the way he led her on. She cut her hair for him. She gave him a piece of her hair, and that's essentially marriage. That's essentially marriage in Austen's world. So they should have been a thing. But Willoughby, being the little tick he is, he's a right little scoundrel. He goes around sleeping around. He knocked somebody up called Alysia, and she had a baby and everything, and he just kind of like cast her aside too, and she got disgraced and everything. And him, the little fucker, he gets away a little bit scot-free. Well, he does kind of get some consequence. He does get like cut off a little bit, and that's why he has to be engaged to Miss Grey, because she ain't married yet, Miss Grey, in order to like reclaim his fortune. So he kind of brushes Marianne aside for fortune. Damn, the more I think about it, actually, I will probably do the same thing. Not gonna lie, I need that money. But that's not the point. Willoughby and Marianne were like meant for each other, essentially. At least that's what I thought when I first read him. What's great about that, though, is that Willoughby does kind of see the error of his ways and tries to... Well, I not essentially like go back to Marianne, but he explains to Eleanor what he did and like why he did it. And Eleanor feels a little bit sorry for him. I don't. But it does show that he still has feelings for Marianne, and that she is kind of like the one who got away. And then Eleanor as well, oh my god, scandalous. Okay, so Eleanor, you know how she, well, I don't know if you know, but like she kind of fell in love with Edward Ferrars, but then she moves to Barton Cottage and doesn't really get to see him. And then a little bit later on, I think it's at the end of part 1, and this is where I was like, I was going to update you after reading part 1, but then I was just like, no, I need to read on. But then at the end of part 1, Lucy, who is, I think, a cousin or something, there was some kind of relation there, I don't know, a cousin of Eleanor's, I don't know. Eleanor describes her very poorly. I found it very judgmental, but, you know, that was the time, wasn't it? Where Lucy hadn't really had much of an education, so Eleanor calls her ignorant and illiterate. Eleanor saw and pitied her for the neglect of abilities which education might have rendered so respectable. But then Lucy drops a bombshell. She's been secretly engaged to Edward for 4 years. 4 years they've been engaged. And Edward was giving off these vibes, these single lady vibes, to Eleanor earlier on. And I'm just like, oh, these men be playing. And obviously Eleanor is shocked and distraught. And I was shocked and distraught as well. Even though I hadn't really kind of fallen in love with him yet, I was still like holding out hope for Eleanor. Because, you know, she's been a little bit pushed to the side when Marianne and Willoughby were having their little bit of a love affair thing going on. So I wanted Eleanor to be happy. Was that too much to ask for? Yes, it was to begin with. I mean, things do get better by the end. And so what happens again? Fanny. Talking about Fanny the bitch. However, she does do something which kind of inevitably means Eleanor and Edward get together. Okay, I'm trying to piece the dots now, because you know what, there's so many different characters and people do so many inconsequential things sometimes, and they're just gossiping and talking about shit, that a lot of it confuzzles my brain. Edward and Lucy, they get outed of their engagement in front of Fanny, but Fanny is... Who is Fanny again? Fanny's Edward's sister. I totally forgot. I knew they were related somehow. But Fanny is Edward's sister. So Edward and Lucy, they get revealed that they are engaged, and Fanny flips her shit. Rightly so. And Edward sticks by Lucy, and Fanny disowns him kind of and like cuts him off. More scandal a little bit later on. Lucy leaves Edward for his younger and more wealthier brother, Robert. So, like, honestly, if I was living in this village, I would not stop gossiping. I can see why now the Austen characters are constantly gossiping, because there's lots to gossip about. But yeah, that was like a, what? But it does mean that Eleanor and Edward could get together. And they do get married. Marianne and Colonel Brandon get together as well. I wasn't a big fan of Marianne while she was with Willoughby because she turned into a sponge. They were slagging Colonel Brandon off, and Colonel Brandon I can't say I'm just gonna say Brandon. Brandon, he has been a bit of a jet setter, he's been around the world a little bit. They make fun of him. And it's mainly Willoughby who starts making fun of him, and Marianne like joins in. Even though I don't think she like really believed it herself. Oh, and Willoughby as well. Something he did quite early on as well that pissed me off was that he was telling the mother, do not change this cottage, do not change it. Even though they're the ones living in it, he was like, I love this cottage the way it is, do not do any improvements to it, do not extend it, do not do this to it. And Eleanor, Marianne's mother's like, okay. I'm just like, bitch, he doesn't live here, he doesn't pay rent. He should not be dictating whether or not you change the cottage. They need more space. They want more space. They want to improve the cottage. And he's like, no, don't change it. I love the way it looks now. Fuck you. Who are you? Where did she come from? Yeah, so I felt so bad for Brandon. Eleanor sticks up for him as well. I loved Eleanor in this moment. I really love Eleanor as a character. I do. So Willoughby says Brandon is just the kind of man whom everybody speaks well of and nobody cares about, whom all are delighted to see and nobody remembers to talk to. And then Marianne cries, that is exactly what I think of him. And I'm just like, Marianne, shut up. Eleanor says, do not boast of it, however, for it is injustice in both of you. He is highly esteemed by all the family at the park, and I never see him myself without taking pains to converse with him. So, Eleanor, Willoughby, we stand somebody who stands up for someone. We do. And then she says, you are prejudiced and unjust. Unjust. Willoughby, psh. And I almost, at this point, was shipping Eleanor with Brandon. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, I mean, maybe they were too alike a little bit. Eleanor needed somebody who was going to be a little bit more, I don't know, fun, I guess, and Edward does provide that. But I do kind of like the fact that Brandon and Marianne do end up falling in love, and you do see how Marianne realizes that her infatuation with Willoughby was not good. Even when, you know, she has the opportunity at the end to maybe go back to him, she's like, no, like, it would never work. And she is like so sensible in that moment. She has overcome her sensibility, or at least she has honed it. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of sensibility every now and then. But like, she hones her sensibility and she makes reason out of it. And I loved it. I thought it was so good. I'm not going to convince myself to give this 5 stars. Because I thought this was, like, so good. There were so many, like, good moments, honestly. I'm just going to have a little look through. Oh, I'm sure there was, like, a funny moment as well that had me laughing. What was it? Oh, actually, something I want to bring up as well is while Marianne is talking about how little or how less of a time she's known Willoughby and how much she knows she loves him, something she says does kind of ring true, and I do quite like what she says. And I'm not gonna lie, but Eleanor and Marianne give me strong Anna and Elsa vibes. I say Frozen in this. Eleanor then ventured to doubt the propriety of her receiving such a present from a man so little, or at least so lately known to her. And then Marianne says, you are mistaken, Eleanor, in supposing I know but little of Willoughby. I have not known him long indeed, but I am much better acquainted with him than I am with any other creature in the world, except yourself and Mamma. It is not time or opportunity that is to determine intimacy, it is disposition alone. 7 years will be insufficient to make some people acquainted with each other, and 7 days are more than enough for others. And you know what? I was like, damn, I actually can't argue with that. Sometimes it's not about how long you've known somebody, but the quality of time you've spent with them. Honestly, this book, it's just so philosophical. I just learned so much from it. But where's this funny part? Oh, I think this is it. Okay, so who was talking again? Margaret is the younger sister of Marianne and Eleanor. So this is Margaret. Margaret's talking about how Willoughby and Marianne are quite possibly engaged. So she says, I have such a secret to tell you about Marianne. I am sure she will be married to Mr. Willoughby very soon. And then Eleanor says, I believe before you were certain that Marianne wore his picture around her neck, but it turned out to be only the miniature of our great uncle. Margaret says, but indeed, this is quite another thing. I am sure they will be married very soon, for he has got a lock of her hair. Eleanor says, take care, Margaret. It may be only the hair of some great uncle of his. And I just find that hilarious. I don't know why, but I was just like, Oh, Eleanor, like, that's just so funny. Yeah, I feel like I've talked quite a bit about this book. You know what, this was quite action-packed in, like, terms of, like, an Austen novel. There were definitely slow moments, there were a lot of chapters that were overtly long, and a lot of kind of just general gossip or general things about characters, side characters, that I didn't find wholly interesting myself, but it was still such a damn good time. I really enjoyed this. I want to watch the adaptation of it, the 1995 one, I think, at some point. I still haven't seen it, so I believe it is on Prime, and I might watch it tomorrow, maybe. It is a bit late now. And I do want to start my next read, which I think is Mansfield Park. Because it was just so good. It was so good. I'm so happy with that. I'm so happy. I was going to go out today. I was going to go to my cute little local coffee shop, but it's raining, so I decided to order in Starbucks instead. But I'm just about to start Mansfield Park, and are you seeing the size of it? 469 pages long. And also, the main character is called Fanny. I don't know how I'm going to get through this with a straight face. I should not be reading Jane Austen. I am not mature enough. I actually finished this yesterday, and I wanted to review it as soon as I finished it, but I just couldn't be bothered. So I'm reviewing it today. And I will say yet again, Jane Austen surprised me. I was one of those people who thought that every Jane Austen book was the same. It was going to be about the same kind of thing. It would be fluffy romance, this, that, and the other. But oh my god, every single one I've read so far, which was like Persuasion, Sense and Sensibility, and then this one, have just been so different. And then the next book I'm reading is Emma, and I know that this is different as well. So I'm just like, Jane Austen, you're making a fool of me, proving me wrong. But I'm loving it, and I didn't love this one as much as the previous two books, I think. I think this might be my least favourite one so far, mainly because it was just so long. I could have done with this being about 150 pages shorter. I think part 1 was the weakest part, volume 1 was the weakest part, and then volume 2 and 3 definitely picked it up for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, actually, this is like kind of really like scandalous a little bit again. And it's the exact same thing that I thought was Sense and Sensibility when things were happening, and I was like, oh my god, like this is just like outrageous scandal. But no, I did end up enjoying this a lot. But I will say, and this one 3 stars, not that it's bad by any means whatsoever. I just think, yeah, I was bored with this one more than the previous two that I've read in this vlog. So Mansfield Park, we do follow Fanny, and honestly, it took me a long time for me to stop being so immature with it. But saying that, though, there were still a few things that I kind of picked up on. So this is Crawford, Henry Crawford, who is the kind of... Okay, I'll tell you the story in a sec, but like, Crawford says on page 340, no, it is Fanny that I think of all day and dream of all night. In the UK, Fanny means vagina. I think in America it means butt. Fanny is vagina in the UK. So, no, it is Fanny that I think of all day and dream of all night. So I think that also helped with my reading of this, because I was just like laughing the entire way through. So we do follow Fanny Bryson. At the very start of the book, she is quite young. She goes to live with Mansfield Park because, well, her mum and dad can't stop fucking and they have so many kids. And Fanny needs to like kind of be almost like fostered at Mansfield Park so that her mum and dad, who are getting quite poor because they have so many children and it's just crowded, and Fanny is just going to be so much better off at Mansfield Park. So this kind of reminded me a little bit of like Great Expectations a little bit at the start. I mean, it's been a long time since I read Great Expectations, but I kind of got the same kind of vibes from that at the start of this than I did at Great Expectations. I don't know why, but I think it's because we started with a younger character who ends up growing up, and I absolutely loved seeing the evolution of Fanny. Like, I need to shut up. And I guess even though she wasn't as magnetic as Anne was in Persuasion, or as charismatic as Marianne and Eleanor are in Sense and Sensibility, I really loved the kind of quiet strength that Fanny had. And I absolutely loved the fact that she turned down a suitor, who was an absolute dick, by the way, but I'll get to that in a minute. I loved the fact that she had the courage and the strength to stand up for herself and to say no when she didn't want something to happen. I just absolutely ate that up. And I thought Fanny was... I mean, I felt so bad for her to begin with, because she is not treated very well at the start of the book, and it almost is a little bit Cinderella-esque. Mrs. Norris, she's a cow. She just says things that are just so mean and hurtful. I think it was like in the very first chapter when she's like, though I could never feel for this little girl, the 100th part of the regard I bear your own dear children, nor consider her in any respect so much my own. Even before she's met this girl, she is like writing her off, which, I mean, of course she doesn't have to like see her as her own daughter, but I think we got a sense from the very beginning that Mrs. Norris was not going to feel for Fanny. I hate myself. And Fanny, she can do things. She can read, she can work, write, and things like that. But, like, her cousins are sometimes, like, really mean about her. Like, she can't understand the concepts of certain things that they've been taught their whole lives that Fanny haven't been taught, as well as, like, Fanny doesn't know, like, the capital of this country or whatever. And just, like, give the girl a chance. I mean, they do grow up together. She does grow up with her cousins, and they do become a bit more friendly as they get older. And from the very beginning as well, Edmund, well, I need to get over this, right? Because I know that back in that day, cousins getting together was kind of a normal thing. So I feel like I have to sort of be on board with that with the Jane Austen books. So Fanny's kind of romance thing, which we don't really get a whole lot of. Fanny's romance is with Edmund, her cousin. But at the very start of the book, it's quite sweet how they're a little bit younger, and it's Edmund's friendship that really helps her. So, like, it says Edmund's friendship never failed her. He tries to make her good qualities understood and to conquer the diffidence which prevented their being more apparent, giving her advice, consultation, and encouragement. He encouraged her taste and corrected her judgment. He made reading useful by talking to her of what she read and heightened its attraction by judicious praise. In return for such services, she loved him better than anybody in the world except William. Her heart was divided between the two. So, like, he is one of the very few people who treats Fanny so nicely when she is younger. So I kind of like the fact that this romance had foundations in some kind of kindness towards one another, rather than it being some kind of, like, toxic thing. But again, they are cousins, so I'm a little bit weirded out by it. I just randomly went to this page. But where is Fanny? Why do I not say my little Fanny? And on perceiving her, came forward with a kindness which astonished and penetrated her, calling her his dear Fanny, kissing her affectionately, and observing with decided pleasure how much she was grown. So that was when Sir Thomas came back to Mansfield Park. Anyway, that jumped right ahead. Yeah, she's grown up a bit, and then she is doing stuff with her cousins, and then in part 2, I think maybe in the end of part 1 actually, she meets siblings, Henry and Mary Crawford. Henry, he's like Willoughby from Sense and Sensibility. He is an absolute dick. And I love reading about these characters who are just so, like, villainous. And I mean, it's not like, you know, a murderer or anything. You know, everyone loves a bit of a bad boy. Not a fucking terrorist though, Chris. He decides that he is going to win Fanny, as if she is like an object. And it's kind of like these modern day kind of romances, or like even films, where a love interest makes a bet that they're going to win somebody's heart. For some reason, the only one I can think of right now is Not Another Teen Movie, which is a parody of something else where somebody places a bet saying that they will win the girl's heart, and then they end up falling in love with her. So I feel like this is kind of one of the earliest examples of that, because Henry, he says, "How do you think I mean to amuse myself? My plan is to make Fanny Price in love with me. But I cannot be satisfied without Fanny Price, without making a small hole in Fanny Price's heart." So out of boredom, out of sheer boredom, he begins to think, oh, I want to try and win Fanny and make her fall in love with me. Like, that's kind of like a conquest thing, like a game to him. So he ends up trying to do that. And I do really like, this is when it started to get interesting, because I genuinely was so bored by the first half. I mean, I really enjoyed seeing Fanny move into Mansfield Park and to see her interact with the cousins. Like, I liked that to begin with, but after a certain amount of time, it got so repetitive, and the conversations were getting so repetitive, and I was just saying things that I just didn't really need to say. But then we started to get into like the main crux of the story, which was, I guess, Henry trying to win Fanny's heart, and Fanny ends up, like, you know, standing up for herself. She's seen how bad Henry is, like the way he treats other women, the way he treats her is not nice, and she is like, no, I'm not going to marry you. I'm not going to even entertain that idea. Yeah, she had by no means forgotten the past, and she thought as ill of him as ever. So, like, she never forgets. And I feel like we all need to be a bit more like Fanny Price, you know. If someone treats us like shit, or if we see somebody treating other people like shit, do not give them the time of day. Just don't. I mean, sure, people can reform, people can change, and maybe that's what Henry does by the end of this. He does seem to be like, oh, Fanny is the one who got away, because, spoiler alert, she does not marry him, which I'm so thankful for, because it could have been easy for her to do that. She was pressured into doing that to begin with by Sir Thomas, and even like Mrs. Norris, and she, again, stands her ground, because even though she is a woman in the society where women had to kind of be secure in a marriage in order to, like, kind of survive, well, Fanny was like, I don't care, I'm not marrying him. And I was just like, oh my god, Fanny, yes. And even this part as well, when Henry says, my Fanny will feel a difference indeed, a daily hourly difference in the behaviour of everything being who approaches her, and it will be the completion of my happiness to know that I am the doer of it, that I am the person to give the consequence so justly her due. Now she is dependent, helpless, friendless, neglected, forgotten. So that is how Henry pictures Fanny. And this is like, again, what, like nearly 300 pages in? He hasn't really reformed at this point, and I don't think he ever really does, because he does end up ruining somebody else at the end. But like, he is seeing Fanny as somebody who will be dependent on him, somebody who isn't happy without him, even though she's absolutely fine without him. And his happiness will grow knowing that he is the one who makes her happy. So he's not genuinely interested in making her happy. He just wants to make her happy so he becomes happy, you know? So like, he is selfish. He is not nice. He's probably hot though. He is probably hot, so I feel like I would give him a pass if I was in this day and age, honestly. I'd probably sleep with him at least once. And then on the next page he says, I will not talk of my own happiness, said he. Great as it is, I only think of yours. You little liar. Literally, 296, she says, don't, Mr. Crawford, pray don't, I beg you would not. This is a sort of token which is very unpleasant to me. I must go away, I cannot bear it. No, no, no. She is adamant that she will not marry him. And I was honestly, the way I stood up cheering for Fanny, and I never thought I'd like a Fanny, but I love this Fanny. And yeah, so volume 2 was so much better than volume 1. Anything else I want to say as well? Mrs. Norris doesn't really get any better. She's like a really good kind of like villain in Jane Austen's world, but I had more to say about the kind of men of Mansfield Park. So, especially Henry, like, he's such an interesting person to read. And so is his sister Mary. Like, their interactions together were so interesting. It was so good to read. If I don't have somebody to direct my conversation or my discussion on this book, I'm just a mess. I'm a mess. So this is why this is a mess. I'm so sorry. And I did feel bad for her as well when Sir Thomas kind of made Fanny feel bad for turning him down, and he says like he's disappointed in her and things like that, and she will not confess the real reason why she will not marry Henry, because, you know, he treats people badly, and it's kind of interlocked with her other cousins as well. If she confesses about why she doesn't want to marry Henry, then her cousins will also get into trouble, or it will kind of expose their kind of behaviours as well. So she stands her ground. She does not say the real reasons or anything like that. She is very loyal, and I couldn't help but admire her. Well, actually, Fanny does say this about Henry. I cannot think well of a man who sports with any woman's feelings, and there may often be a great deal more suffered than a stander-by can judge of. Like, honestly, preach, that statement applies to today. Today. You wouldn't think this was written 200 years ago, honestly. Other than the kind of language and the fact that Jane Austen loves to write a very long sentence. But it's good. Anyway, I can't find the part I was thinking of, where she kind of ends up defending her cousins and make sure nobody else gets in trouble, even though if she had come clean about everything that Henry's done, she would have been seen less of a disappointment in Sir Thomas's eyes, who took her in. Like, he took her in Mansfield Park. He has been so kind to her, and she loves him dearly, but she, again, is so loyal that she didn't come clean about Henry's true motivations, his true actions, or anything like that, for fear of getting other people in trouble. So, honestly, I love Fanny. I think Fanny's amazing. Do I like her more than the other heroines I've read? Maybe. She might be my favourite heroine so far. Even though this is like my least favourite Jane Austen book so far, I still feel like Fanny is a fantastic character. Really enjoyed reading about her. The relationship between her and Edmund, I mean, you don't really get a whole lot of it, to be honest, because he is kind of, well, devoted to someone else as well, but they do love one another, and you can kind of see it in their interactions. But like, yeah, he's kind of like betrothed. Is it to Mary? I think he's betrothed to Mary. Then by the end of it, Fanny and Edmund do get married. You don't really get a whole like proposal or anything. You don't really get like the kind of, you know, swept off the feet romance kind of thing with Fanny and Edmund. So I wasn't really that bothered by it, but I did like Edmund as character. He was very nice to Fanny. But yeah, that's all I can really say about Edmund, really. He was nice. And Fanny was nice as well, and I just absolutely love the fact that she has like the strongest morals of any Austen heroine I've read so far. Not the most interesting heroine, of course, like she is like a bit too nice, but you know, I really appreciate and respect, especially in the time frame that she is set in, that she managed to still stand on her own 2 feet and vocalized her opinions, her feelings, and, you know, she was very strong for that. So I really respect and admire Fanny. So yes, let's check in so far. Mansfield Park, I think, is 3 stars. Persuasion, I think, is 3.5 stars. And Sense and Sensibility is 4 stars. So that is my current kind of ranking. Next, I am reading Emma. This is my favourite Jane Austen from what I read before. However, it might change after rereading this. Who knows, it might slip under Sense and Sensibility. But I'm really excited. I'm really excited to reread this because I feel like I can appreciate this a little bit more now as well. And I don't know why. I feel like I'm a lot better with Jane Austen's books, or at least understanding them more than when I first read this. And I still loved it back then. I'll probably love it even more now. So it is quite long, about the same length as Mansfield Park, which doesn't intimidate me as much because the story, the characters they're in here. So I feel okay with that. But yeah, I feel pretty great about where I'm at. And I'm loving my Jane Austen experience. I'm loving it. Honestly, it's been so good. It is now 1 a.m. and I have a train in the morning to Ipswich. But I didn't want to stop reading or rereading Emma. I have myself a tea. It's an English breakfast tea. Well, technically it's only 5 hours until breakfast time for me. No sleep for the wicked. And if the camera keeps moving, it's because you're resting on my bed and my cats are currently playing on the bed. Well, one of them's down beside me, actually. Hiya, Toby. So just expect a lot of movement. Oh. So Emma, honestly, it's just as amazing as I remember it. I love this the second time round again. I honestly, it's just so good. There's just the drama, the comedy is perfect. And I love Emma, I really do. I love her as a character. She's just so complex. And after just reading Mansfield Park as well, when we had Fanny, and I loved Fanny, but like she was like a totally different kind of character. She was very nice. But Emma, she isn't all that nice. She sometimes does have, you know, the best of intentions, but she doesn't always come across the way that she ought. So it's really interesting to read Emma as a character. She's just, literally my favourite Jane Austen heroine. And I love how deluded she gets and how caught up in what she's doing she gets and how comical that becomes. So we do start off with Emma and she lives with her father and she's just matchmaked. She's just got two people together, her governess who acted like a mother and someone else, I forgot who it was. Yeah, she did have some success in matching them two together and she is very full of herself, she's very confident, which honestly, fair game, you know. Fair game. She has every right to be confident. Love it for her. We get introduced very early on to Mr. Knightley, who is the hero of this story. Well, you know, he is the Jane Austen hero anyway. Yeah, he's introduced on page 7. He's a sensible man, about 7 or 8 and 30. So he's, 38, 37 years old. And Emma, she is, how old is Emma again? Lived nearly 21 years, so she's only 20. There's a 17-18 year difference between Emma and Mr. Knightley, and I'm not gonna lie, that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. I'm trying not to enforce my modern day standards on a book that was written in a totally different time, but it's still a bit weird, and especially since Mr. Knightley also mentioned about how he held Emma as a baby once as well. So I'm just like, not the one. But again, I'm trying not to enforce my Monty, but even then I still think it's strange. Like even back then, Shelley, that was a bit strange. But I still absolutely adore this book as a whole, even though again I'm not really that taken by the romance. I'm reading these Jane Austen books, right, and I'm not taken by the romances that much. I don't really think they come across as holy romance. What I love about Jane Austen, right, and this is probably why I'm reading Jane Austen, is the character work, the character depth, the heroines and what they stand for and what they do, and the drama as well. I didn't realise just how much drama and scandal happens in Jane Austen's book. I genuinely thought these were a lot cleaner, you know what I mean? Like a lot more fluffy, but in a like 19th century kind of setting. But no, it's like, it's so good. I love it. The hijinks. Okay, so I love Emma because she keeps thinking she is the best at sort of matching people up, but oh my god, she's the worst. But it's so funny seeing her have so many moments of miscommunication, and we get introduced to Harriet as well, who is sort of Emma's protege. She is like an illegitimate daughter, so she is pretty, but she's not very smart. She isn't very, I guess, well-bred, as you would say in these days. She has a bit of a lower social standing, but Emma absolutely adores her, and you can really see how much she like is trying to get Harriet to be happy. But oh my god, poor Harriet. Poor Harriet is the catchphrase of this book because Emma messes up so many times and it's always at the expense of Harriet. But she always has the best intentions, so Emma can be a terrible friend, I'll give you that. But she does really love Harriet. She really does care for her. Just everything goes wrong. All right, yeah, so for the first kind of matchmaking thing that she wants to do is Mr. Elton and Harriet. Elton ends up falling for Emma. And so it leads to this hilarious exchange. I mean, hilarious at Emma's expense. There's a bit of a dance or like a ball that happens, and Emma's still kind of set on Mr. Elton and Harriet getting together. But then she starts to realise that Mr. Elton, is in love with Emma. So that kind of comes to a head when they're both in the carriage. Like, honestly, it's like a sitcom. But like through circumstance, they end up in a carriage, just the two of them, Emma and Mr. Elton. Like, she's still adamant that he wants Harriet. And Emma says, after such behaviour as I have witnessed during the last month to Miss Smith, such attentions as I have been in the daily habit of observing, which honestly, Emma sees what she wants to see. She has her heart set on something, and she has like this goal, which is amazing. But like, she gets so many wires crossed, and she kind of sees what isn't actually there. So yeah, she continues to be interested in me in this manner. This is an unsteadiness of character indeed, which I had not supposed possible. So she didn't foresee the fact that Mr. Elton would fall in love with her. And even though it should have been obvious to her, it wasn't, because she thought, or at least she wanted Mr. Elton to be in love with Harriet. So, you know, Mr. Elton says, what can be the meaning of this, Miss Smith? I never thought of Miss Smith in the whole course of my existence. And yeah, like, Emma is conflicted, impossible to say what Emma felt on hearing this. She was too completely overpowered to be immediately able to reply. She feels like she's never been wrong before, and this is kind of like the first big shock of the book that she is actually wrong. And that's just, oh my god, it's so funny. And then he continues to say that, you know, he loves Emma, and then he says the encouragement that he received, and Emma's like, encouragement? I give you encouragement, so you have been entirely mistaken in supposing it. I have no thoughts of matrimony at present. And it's like, even he got his wires crossed, because Emma was so adamant on him falling in love with Harriet that, you know, it just, oh my god, it's a mess. Emma is a messy book. It's just a messy character as well, and I love her for it. And one thing I love about Emma as well is when she opposes Mr. Knightley early on, and he says something about, I can't remember who they're talking about, but a woman rejects a man's proposal, and then Mr. Knightley says, then she is a greater simpleton than I ever believed her. What is this foolish girl about? Then Emma says, oh, to be sure, it is always incomprehensible to a man that a woman should ever refuse an offer of marriage. A man always imagines a woman to be ready for anybody who asks her. I'm just like, tell him, drag him. And I do really love the banter between Emma and Mr. Knightley. They oppose each other so much, and I really love that. But am I on board with the relationship? I don't think I am. He sounds like such a catch. He does. He sounds like he could be very, very hot. And I can't really remember who played him in the Emma adaptation, because I also watched the 2020 Emma like a couple of years back when it came out, and I really enjoyed the adaptation, but I cannot for the life of me remember who played Mr. Knightley. But yeah, their kind of relationship starts to come about. But what also is hilarious about this, and again, poor Harriet, is that Harriet has a fall, which is kind of a recurring theme for these heroines. We've had like a fall in nearly every book, or at least I think she like kind of faints. Frank Churchill saves Harriet. Frank Churchill carries her in. Frank Churchill, with Harriet leaning on his arm. Actually, Harriet, a moment sufficed to convince her that something extraordinary had happened. Harriet looked white and frightened, and he was trying to cheer her. It was his idea to bring her to Hartfield. He had thought of no other place. So like, Frank Churchill kind of is that sort of knight in shining armour, kind of Willoughby to Marianne almost. And so Emma sees this as, oh, well, hello there. Harriet's the damsel in distress, and Frank Churchill is, you know, the one who's gonna, well, born her. At least that's what Emma was hoping. So she believes that Harriet is now falling in love with Frank Churchill. What she doesn't realise is that Harriet is actually falling in love with Mr. Knightley. And Emma is also slowly coming to the realisation that she loves Mr. Knightley. So, like, again, we have threads at odds. And again, poor Harriet, because Mr. Knightley also reciprocates the feelings to Emma. And it just... it's messy, I'm telling you, it's messy. So Emma, yet again, trying to get Frank Churchill and Harriet together. Well, actually, no, she says that she's not going to. She says that she's not going to put her nose into it, because she's kind of learned a lesson at this point. But she observes, and she is adamant that Frank Churchill and Harriet will be a couple. But obviously not going to happen, because Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax I haven't mentioned Jane Fairfax. There's so many different characters, honestly. I'm sure I could talk about these books for hours on end. But Jane Fairfax is somebody who comes into it and Emma automatically doesn't really like her. Jane is kind of in the same kind of standing as Emma, but Jane is a lot more educated than Emma and she's accomplished much more than Emma. So Emma automatically feels this like dislike for Jane. But yeah, Frank Churchill and Jane are actually engaged. Oh, one moment where Emma was an absolute bitch. I didn't like Emma in this moment. And this was kind of like a wake-up call for Emma, though, so I feel like this was, like, important for her. But it's during the Box Hill picnic, and they're kind of joking around, just, like, having some games. They say something about entertaining one another or something, or saying 3 dull things, and Miss Bates says, "Then I need not be uneasy. 3 things very dull indeed. That will just do for me, you know. I shall be sure to say 3 dull things as soon as ever I open my mouth, shan't I?" And just kind of, like, joking on. But then Emma could not resist. "Ah, ma'am, but there may be a difficulty. Pardon me, but you will be limited as to number, only 3 at once," which indicates that Emma finds her absolutely dull and boring. And Miss Bates doesn't immediately think that she is being serious, but then it dawns on her, and then she gets upset, and then Mr. Knightley tells Emma she was cruel, and then Emma gets upset, Emma cries, and it's just like a turning point for Emma because she feels remorseful, she realises what she's done, she realises she needs to stop and think before she speaks. But like, again, that just makes such an endearing character because we have Emma who grows so much from the very first page to the last, and she has kind of come full circle by the end. She is a lot more considerate, she is a lot more honest as well, especially about her own feelings. I think she's suppressed a lot at the start. She's managed to be able to feel herself a bit more free with the truth, you know, and she isn't making as many, well, she isn't jumping to as many conclusions as she used to, and she is kind of, yeah, remorseful for the things that she's done wrong. And she owns up to her mistakes, she admits she's wrong when she's wrong, and that just makes a great character to me. And it is sweet to see Emma start to realise that she's fallen in love because she's so adamant that she's never going to marry, but then she does start falling for Mr. Knightley, and she has these feelings that she's like so confused by, and it's endearing to see. It's kind of nice to see how she handles that and develops with that. But again, I'm just not sure. I'm not sure about that coupling. However, I'm still going to give this like 5 stars because this is my like favourite Jane Austen. It hasn't changed since when I read it for the first time. It's just, yeah, it's so funny, so good, so dramatic at times, and just such a great read, honestly. So I don't think anything's going to top Emma. I do have some more great reads coming up, but, well, especially since I haven't read a couple of them. So I'm just so happy. Because Mansfield Park was my least favourite, and then went straight into Emma, which is my favourite. So I call that a bounce back for Miss Austen. Or was it Mrs. Austen? Was she married? Good morning. I am going to Ipswich this morning to visit my friend Jade. So I'm going to take Pride and Prejudice with me, and I'm going to start it on the train there. I have like 3 trains there, and it's going to take a good 4.5 hours, I think. So this will be perfect time to hopefully make a dent in this so that I can hopefully get it finished this weekend. Fingers crossed. But I do still have some time before my train, so I'm just going to sit here with my coffee and enjoy the morning. This is my favourite type of morning, honestly. Like, it's, 9 a.m? And it's just like very quiet outside. There's some birds singing and the sun looks fresh, and I'm excited. Jane Austen's most famous novel, and one that a lot of people love. A lot of people put this as their favourite Jane Austen book. So, let's go. For the majority of reading this book, especially the first, I would say 190 pages, I was reading this thinking, this could probably be my least favourite Jane Austen book. Not gonna lie, that's exactly what I was thinking. I'm not even just saying that to stir up shit. I was thinking, I'm so bored. I'm not feeling anyone or anything at this point in time, no questions. And I was honestly scared for my life. I was scared for my life because I knew I would have to come onto here and say, I like this less than Mansfield Park. This is my least favourite Jane Austen book so far. And then we got to around about the 180 page mark. And then things started to pick up again. And then throughout the entire first half of this novel, I was like, what is the fascination with Mr. Darcy? What is the fascination with Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy's relationship? Why is this considered such a great romance? And then it hit me. It hit me like a tab truck. I did end up falling in love with Mr. Darcy by the end. And honestly, I was so confused. I was so confused for so much of this because I just thought, what has everybody been saying this entire time? What am I missing here? And then, yeah, things slowly start to happen, and it turns out that I think Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy are probably the best romantic relationship I've read in a Jane Austen novel so far. So let me just backtrack a little bit. Oh, hello, Ash. So this story follows the Bennet family, and we have Mr. Bennet, who has 5 daughters. Now, if Mr. Bennet dies, these 5 daughters will not inherit anything, because in this time period, a lot of inheritance would go to a male heir. So the main goal, or the main motivating factor of this book to begin with, is to try to marry off the 5 Bennet daughters with somebody who is going to help save their family from ruin, financial ruin, essentially. So straight away, I was like, this is not the kind of story I would love to read. It's no Emma. Stemming from that, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is one of the Bennet daughters, and she is the main character. I would say she was the main character. She is kind of the Prejudice to Mr. Darcy's Pride. However, I would argue that both characters, Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth, exhibit both behaviours. And because of that, they both undergo such character transformations by the end of it. And I'm not going to tell you my rating for this book until I finish talking about this book. Yeah, by chapter 3, we have a sort of dance, a ball, and we end up getting introduced to Mr. Darcy. Mr. Bingley is the person who has moved in, and the narrator says, Mr. Bingley was good-looking and gentlemanlike. He had a pleasant countenance and easy, unaffected manners. But his friend, Mr. Darcy, soon drew the attention of the room by his fine, tall person, handsome features, noble mien, and the report, which was in general circulation within 5 minutes after his entrance, of his having 10,000 a year. So not only is he like the man who your eyes are automatically drawn to, but he is also stinking rich. And I love that. I do love that. The ladies declared he was much handsomer than Mr. Bingley. And then this is where we get the kind of, okay, Mr. Darcy's hot. What is his catch? What is his catch? The catch is, he's actually an arrogant arsehole. So the narrator says, and he was looked at with great admiration for about half the evening, till his manners gave a disgust which turned the tide of his popularity, for he was discovered to be proud, to be above his company, and above being pleased. So a lot of the conflict in this is the kind of idea that Mr. Darcy is somebody who is like a bit too proud. He is very unapproachable, and he has these opinions of other people, other families, that make him think that they're beneath him and they're not worthy of his time. So this is where the kind of conflict between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy begins, because as Mr. Darcy is talking to his friend says that, you know, one of the other Bennet sisters are attractive, and Mr. Darcy says, which do you mean? And turning round, he looked for a moment at Elizabeth, till catching her eye, he withdrew his own and coldly said, she is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me, and I am in no humour at present to give consequence to young girls who are slighted by other men. You had better return to your partner and enjoy her smiles, but you're wasting your time with me. And Elizabeth remained with no very cordial feelings towards him. So this is like on page 12, like literally page 12, and the first impression between Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth is awful. It's god awful. And Mrs. Bennet, you know, Elizabeth's mother says, he's a most disagreeable, horrid man, not at all worth pleasing, so high and so conceited that there was no enduring him. Pretty much everyone has this agreed perceivance of Mr. Darcy based on first impressions. This kind of, a bit like Emma, leads to some miscommunication later on, a bit of not seeing eye to eye for kind of the wrong reasons sometimes, because Elizabeth can come across as a little bit too prejudiced, and she does kind of hold on to things or opinions, especially opinions, a bit too long. However, I do love Elizabeth. She does grow a lot in this book, as does Mr. Darcy. And I feel like what's so endearing about them, not just as a couple, but as separate characters, is that they have that character growth. And it wasn't until they started having this character growth that I was realizing, oh, you know what? I am actually enjoying this. It is a good story, and I'm liking where it's going. Still not the most entertaining Austen novel, I think. And I haven't seen any of the Pride and Prejudice adaptations, so I'm not using the movie adaptations to cloud my judgment on this. So going back to Elizabeth, you know, she says, I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. So yeah, we have both characters have such huge prideful personalities, and that really does clash, and that makes it so interesting to see them interact. Like, I've never seen two Austen characters interact the way that Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth do, and it leads to some fantastic tense moments later on. And you know what, even early on, it seemed like Elizabeth could kind of see Mr. Darcy's points on some things. My cats are currently playing, so they're a little bit distracted. I'm just going through some of my highlighted things because, you know, as I speak, I just ramble and talk about random stuff. And there is other things going on with the family as well. You know, a little bit of scandal with a younger sister running off with Wickham and how that could bring ruin to the family. I wasn't really overly taken by that storyline, and it did inject a little bit more drama into it. But I think at the point of when that happened, I was still like, this book is majorly quite dull to me. So I'm just going to really focus on Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. I hope that's okay with you. Because, say by chapter 10, Elizabeth's starting to really like Mr. Darcy in a way that she's trying to keep it inside and keep it hidden because she's a little bit confused about her feelings. The narrator says Elizabeth could not help observing, as she turned over some music books sadly on the instrument, how frequently Mr. Darcy's eyes were fixed on her. She hardly knew how to suppose that she could be an object of admiration to so great a man, and yet that he should look at her because he disliked her was still more strange. She does kind of think that maybe there's something wrong with her and that's why he continues to look at her, but, you know, that kind of silent observation of one another is something that I find so interesting in Pride and Prejudice, because they're not being so open about their feelings just yet. This is still quite early on, but because they're not being open and honest about their feelings, this is where a lot of the miscommunication comes into it. And I love this part where Elizabeth tells Mr. Darcy to despise me if you dare, and he just replies, indeed I do not dare. And that's kind of just like that little bit of hint of perhaps there's something there that wasn't there before. You know what I mean? Darcy had never been so bewitched by any woman as he was by her. And at that point I was just like, okay, it seems like Mr. Darcy is falling for Elizabeth a lot more quickly than she's fallen for him. Definitely rightly so, because what we learn going through this book is that Elizabeth has been held back by her early prejudice of Mr. Darcy, her first impressions of him, and the kind of unwillingness to accept that he isn't exactly who she thinks he is. I love this part. Okay, so when they're kind of chatting, this is like a little bit on the nose because this is when Jane Austen is directly mentioning pride and it being something that is kind of holding the characters back. Mr. Darcy says, but pride, where there is a real superiority of mind, pride will be always under good regulation. Elizabeth turned away to hide a smile. Your examination of Mr. Darcy is over, I presume, said Miss Bingley, and pray, what is the result? Elizabeth says, I am perfectly convinced by it that Mr. Darcy has no defect. He owns it himself without disguise. And I feel like she says that in such a sarcastic way. And Mr. Darcy says, no, I have no such pretension. I have faults enough. Elizabeth says, and your defect is a propensity to hate everybody. And yours, he replied with a smile, is willfully to misunderstand them. And this whole back and forth of being at each other's throats is so... It was good to watch. Honestly, it was. I was entertained by it. But there's just so much padding around it that I was getting bored, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, let's just skip further ahead. Because, yeah, there wasn't really too much that happened in Volume 1 that really caught my attention. Oh, also, I hate Lady Catherine. Again, this is randomly thrown in here in this discussion. Hey, Lady Catherine. She was so mean to Elizabeth. So horrible. And I loved when Elizabeth would stand up to her, because she would stand up to her a lot. She had to. She had to keep defending herself from this bitch, essentially. And Elizabeth suspected herself to be the first creature who ever dared to trifle with so much dignified impertinence. She does some, like, worse things moving on. I just saw on page 178. She has a very good notion of fingering, though her taste is not equal to Anne's. Jane Austen was dirty. Jane Austen was very dirty. I'm joking. I totally took that out of context. So moving on from that, we have Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. They were able to have conversations with one another, and it would be quite easy to fall into a conversation with one another. But then by, say, page 179, Mr. Darcy comes into the room. There's so much, like, tension, and Elizabeth's feeling awkward. It seemed in danger of sinking into total silence. It was absolutely necessary, therefore, to think of something. So the fact that Elizabeth is, like, scrambling around to talk to Mr. Darcy, something's holding her back because she has these feelings that she's trying to suppress, and it's kind of entertaining to watch. Right, so I think the big turning point for me while reading this book, because again I was pretty bored up to this point, page 191, when Mr. Darcy proposes to Elizabeth, which did kind of surprise me that he would do it that early on. But when I was just going through some of my highlightings before this, there are a lot of moments where Mr. Darcy, like, observes Elizabeth, or, like, he kind of seems to admire her without being able to convey that through words or emotion. Mr. Darcy is just kind of lingering around, and we're kind of led to read into what his inaction and his inability to speak, what that means, you know? So then, yeah, he ends up proposing and says, "You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you." And Elizabeth is astonished, and he does end up kind of like insulting her family at the same time. So she really adamantly says no to marrying him, which, now that I've read quite a few Jane Austen books in a row, that does happen a lot. So it's not really a new concept to me, having the woman who, you know, again, like in this time period, it would have been so important for her to find somebody to help secure her future and her finances, because she could inherit so much money and she can help her family that way. So there is a lot riding on Elizabeth with this proposal. Yeah, it is still a huge thing, absolutely still a huge thing. But I've read it a couple of times now already in Jane Austen's books, you know, a proposal being turned down. So it's not really something that's kind of like, oh my god, this moment, wow, you go girl. I didn't have that reaction to it, but I totally understand and get how crucial this moment is. But I do love the way she rebuffs him. And please pay no attention to Tobo playing with a McDonald's wrapper, okay? You've literally ruined me looking like I'm some kind of professional, that I'm some kind of posh intellectual talking about Jane Austen. You have to bring out the McDonald's wrapper. Where'd you get it from anyway? Did you order McDonald's while I was in Ipswich? So Elizabeth rebuts him and tells him all the things he's done wrong. And it's incredible, honestly. It is such a great moment. I love, like, the whole turning down his proposal. Yes, I've seen it. But her being so adamant that she will never marry him, and she has these huge opinions on him, and she puts him in his place. And Mr. Darcy's like, "My faults according to this calculation are heavy indeed, but perhaps these offences might have been overlooked had not your pride been hurt by my honest confession of the scruples that had long prevented my forming any serious design." And goes on to talk about Elizabeth's prejudice against him. And yeah, Elizabeth says, "Of my acquaintance with you, your manners impressing me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain of the feelings of others were such as to form that groundwork of disapprobation on which succeeding events have built so immovable a dislike. And I had not known you a month before I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry." And that is such a good, like, sentence, and you know, it really does convey the anger that Elizabeth has. But I feel like there's just so much emotion there too, like besides anger, that has made her confront him in this way with this much vehemence and anger. And it's just like, I was at this point, I was like, okay, I'm not as bored as I was. This is getting somewhere, this is getting good. So blah blah blah, Mr. Darcy kind of goes away for a little bit. He helps the family, even though he doesn't have to. Yeah, Mr. Darcy does, like, prove that he is quite protective of himself. Yeah, because of his wealth and things, he has to be careful about the people who he talks to, who he allows into his life. And we do get a little bit more of an insight through letters, through his actions. Like, the thing is, what you learn about Mr. Darcy later on is through actions, not through words, not through the way he acts to somebody else like Elizabeth. It's through what he actually does. He helps to save the Bennet family, essentially. He helps people out in need, and in doing so, he wins the affection of Elizabeth. Oh god, I could cry, it's so beautiful. She ends up going to Pemberley, which is Mr. Darcy's, like, estate, and it's an incredible place. It's a remarkable place. And this is when they get into territory where, like, it's really, like, cute almost, and just kind of endearing the way they kind of react to one another. So they see each other for the first time in a while, and it says they were within 20 yards of each other, and so abrupt was his appearance that it was impossible to avoid his sight. Their eyes instantly met, and the cheeks of each were overspread with the deepest blush. Now, the fact that both of them blush, and blushing was something that I guess was, back in this time, something that only women really did, that showed their sensibility, their emotion, that they were kind of overcome with love or any other kind of emotion that would make them blush. But the fact Mr. Darcy also blushes at this time, I was like, okay, I see what you're doing here, Miss Austen, I see it. And one of the things I think that I'm giving Pride and Prejudice a lot of credit for now, you know, being this deep into the book, the overturning of Elizabeth as a character. Well, overturning, probably too strong a word. Maybe, like, kind of just the growth. Like, she didn't have to overturn anything, really. She just had to overcome some of the prejudices that she had to begin with. So she doesn't really feel hatred towards him anymore. But now she feels gratitude not merely for having once loved her, but for loving her still well enough to forgive all the petulance and acrimony of her manner in rejecting him, and all the unjust accusations accompanying her rejection. She herself admits when she's done wrong, and she takes that as a lesson that really strengthens her character and helps her to move forward so that she can be in a place where she's happy. So her prejudice has really held her back, just as Mr. Darcy's pride has held him back. And by cultivating both of those like emotions or those kind of character traits, they flourish, they become better people, and they become better people together, which is so cute. And even, oh my god, right, so this is a moment again where like Mr. Darcy like stands up for Elizabeth, and this was like, oh, be still my beaten vagina, you know. Miss Bingley's trying to, well, pretty much shit talk Elizabeth, and she says, how very ill Eliza Bennet looks this morning, Mr. Darcy. I never in my life saw anyone so much altered as she is since this winter. For my own part, I must confess that I never could see any beauty in her. She keeps saying these things, and Mr. Darcy is like not biting the bullet. And then she says, I remember when we first knew her in Hertfordshire, how amazed we all were to find that she was a reputed beauty, and I particularly recollect your saying one night, after they had been dining at Netherfield, she a beauty? I should as soon call her mother a wit. And then Mr. Darcy says, yes, but that was only when I first knew her, for it is many months since I have considered her as one of the most handsomest women of my acquaintance. So this moment where Mr. Darcy doesn't kind of take the bait in slagging Elizabeth off, he really confronts what it was that made the conflict in the very beginning such a problem. And again, that stems from, you know, Mr. Darcy's judgment on Elizabeth on a first impression. Baby, are you trying to bite me? Or are you trying to lick us now? And he just completely stands up for her. And that is a sign of a very good character. The sign of a very, very good character. And a great sign of somebody who, you know, at first was very rude about Elizabeth to defending her. We love to see the growth. And then Elizabeth learns that Mr. Darcy was the one who helped her younger sister get married, and in doing so helped her family from ruin, essentially. Like, he really helped everything. He really did. Elizabeth now has that kind of, oh my god, Mr. Darcy is not the person I thought he was. And it's when Elizabeth is talking to Lady Catherine, and Lady Catherine wants her daughter to be the one to marry Mr. Darcy. And I hate Lady Catherine. She's horrible. She's nasty. She says, I will not be interrupted. Hear me in silence. When she's talking to Elizabeth about the, you know, the marriage that she wants. And she really, really does not want Elizabeth to marry Mr. Darcy. And she calls her an unfeeling, selfish girl. And she says to Elizabeth, I shall not go away till you have given me the assurance I require that she is not going to marry Mr. Darcy. And Elizabeth says, and I certainly never shall give it. I am not to be intimidated into anything so wholly unreasonable. Your ladyship wants Mr. Darcy to marry your daughter, but would my giving you the wished for promise make their marriage at all more probable? And then later says, Lady Catherine, I have nothing further to say. You know my sentiments. And then she's literally just like, fuck off, Lady Catherine. And lo and behold, we get that kind of big romantic scene between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. And what I've noticed about some of the Austen novels before this is that the main love interests kind of just get engaged, and there isn't really a whole kind of hullabaloo about it or anything. It seems quite quick and quite sudden, the kind of change towards the end of the book that happens. But in this one, you really do feel it pretty much throughout. Like, you see the building of their relationship more so than any other Austen book, in my opinion. We lead to this great scene where we kind of learn even more about the characters as characters, again, not just as like love interests or as like romantic objects, but as characters. So like with Mr. Darcy, he says, I was spoiled by my parents, and he was encouraged, almost taught, to be selfish and overbearing, to care for none beyond my own family circle, to think meanly of the rest of the world, to wish at least to think meanly of their sense and worth compared with my own. And he really owns up to the fact that he had the prejudices laid into him, and this pride was manufactured by his parents. And having that moment where he's like, this is who I was because of what happened when I was a child and what I learned as a child growing up. He has had to unlearn so much of that in order to really let his heart talk for him, because he loves Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, again, comes from a family that isn't really deemed, you know, the most wealthiest, or, well, I mean, as Mr. Darcy has said, they are below his worth or below his station. He's had to really overcome so much internal struggle and had to unlearn all the things his parents taught him in order to become one with his feelings and to welcome the love he has for Elizabeth. And it's just so beautiful. It's so goddamn beautiful. And now I know why people love Mr. Darcy. And even Elizabeth is like, there can be no doubt of that. It's a cell between us already that we are to be the happiest couple in the world. And when she's talking to her father, she says, I do like him, she replied with tears in her eyes. I love him. Indeed, he has no improper pride. He is perfectly amiable. You do not know what he really is. Then pray do not pain me by speaking of him in such terms. So she really defends Mr. Darcy, and she is defending her love for Mr. Darcy, and it's just beautiful. Like, that relationship there is beautiful. The romance is beautiful. Yeah, I love that part of it. But again, like, I really was let down by like the first 200 pages of this book. It really dragged it down for me. So I'm probably going to give this one 3.5 stars. It's not terrible by any means. It's not my least favourite. But there was a point where it was going to be my least favourite. But fortunately, because of the exploration of Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy and their growth, it made it one of my favourite relationships in Jane Austen's book so far, and showed just how great an author Austen is for doing that, you know? So yeah, I really did end up enjoying it, but I wish it had have held my interest the entire way through and didn't make me feel as bored as I was for the beginning of it. So I apologise if this is your favourite Jane Austen book. I really do. I know when I was watching a lot of Jane Austen rankings, a lot of people put this as number one, or very, very high up on their list. And I do acknowledge this is quite possibly Jane Austen's best work in terms of characterization, but it's not my favourite. And I can give credit where credit is due, because this is, yeah, a fantastic book, just not the book that I deem Austen's best, in my opinion. My mug of choice. Today, as I discuss Northanger Abbey, Lord Twat of Nobbington Manor. This was gifted to me on my birthday, and this is the first time I've used it. So, Northanger Abbey. This is one that I feel a lot of people put on the bottom of their Jane Austen rankings, or kind of somewhere near the bottom of their rankings. And a lot of people don't really get it, a lot of people don't like it, and that's fair, honestly. Like, I didn't love Pride and Prejudice the way I thought I would, because other people love it so much, but my love for Northanger Abbey knows no bounds. I love this book. I think it's fantastic, and a lot of the reason why I love this book is because of the gothic element to it, and the fact that Jane Austen parodies so many gothic tropes and uses the gothic in order to kind of inform her own story in this book, the story of Catherine, and how she herself is obsessed with gothic books. I love the fact that The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe was mentioned so many times, and that is something that Catherine herself, as well as Isabella and other people who belong in the story, have read and know Mrs. Radcliffe, as she was called, and her stories are literally, like, I never ever see, like, Anne Radcliffe discussed or mentioned in anything ever, really. I feel like Anne Radcliffe has had such a disservice in terms of, like, gothic fiction. These days, I mean, she was hailed back in her day. She was, you know, the person who kind of, well, she didn't start the gothic genre by any means, but she really cultivated it, and she made it kind of what it became in the 1790s, and she was just lauded for her incredible writing, and rightly so. But you never see her talked about these days. You never see any really nice fancy editions of her books, which I wish there were really fancy editions of, like, The Mysteries of Udolpho and the Italian, because the Italian is my favourite gothic classic of all time, if not my favourite classic of all time. It is just so fantastic, and both of these books were mentioned. Udolpho more so, definitely the main inspiration behind Catherine's kind of gothic sensibilities, and I just ate that shit up, what can I say? But yeah, I freaking love Anne Radcliffe. I love her that much, okay? If you do not know, I've mentioned this a few times on my channel before, but I did my dissertation on Anne Radcliffe. I mainly did, well, my dissertation was called Anne Radcliffe's Feminist Heroes, Cultivating Sensibility and Overcoming Patriarchal Oppression in The Mysteries of Udolpho, 1794, and The Italian, 1797. And I haven't read this in a long time, so I don't know if it's any good anymore. But I did get a first on it, and I was so proud and happy because I adored my subject matter of Gothic literature and kind of going against the grain. You know what, why don't I just read you the abstract? Do you want to know the abstract of my dissertation. And also, I did like really fancy kind of heading title thingamabobbies as well. I was just such an extra bitch. The Mysteries of Udolpho, 1794, and The Italian, 1797, are Gothic works of Anne Radcliffe that were published following the discourse made by Mary Wollstonecraft in A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, 1792. Wollstonecraft fights for the liberation of women from their oppressive states, an ideology that is represented in Radcliffe's work. This project will examine the heroines of Udolpho in Italian, Emily St. Aubert and Elena Rosalba, and how they allow a feminist reading of Radcliffe's Gothic work. I will examine the similarities between Rights of Woman, Udolpho and Italian when exploring the political landscape of the 1790s, offering a different way of reading the conservative Radcliffe by connecting her with the radical Wollstonecraft. The elevation of women to rise above oppression is fundamental in the progression of the heroines of Udolpho and Italian. They cultivate their sensibility, a feat only achieved through independence away from the love plot that is typical of a sentimental novel. The focus on the female self is essential. The independence and cultivation of sensibility leads to active strength so that the heroines can overcome patriarchal tyranny, highlighting the self-empowerment of women that lifts them out of their oppression. Radcliffe develops her heroines from their perceived weakness to their conquering strengths so that they are no longer subordinated by men and women who conform to patriarchal ideals. Whew, that was a bit of a mouthful. I probably could have shortened that, but you know, I loved writing about it. I loved researching it, and just anything to do with the Gothic was just incredible. But yes, I loved writing in this. I may end up giving that a read later on today. So going back to this then, because I do love the fact that Catherine is a heroine who isn't exactly heroine. She isn't seen as somebody typical of being a hero. She is, well, described as quite plain to begin with. In some ways, she is kind of a bit like Fanny in the fact that, you know, she is cold, plain to her face. No one who had ever seen Catherine Morland in her infancy would have supposed her born to be a heroine. And even on the second page as well, her mother and father discuss Catherine and say that she's almost pretty today. Almost pretty. God, the people back then were not afraid to say their minds, were they? They just weren't afraid. Before we get to the stuff about the Gothic, we do get introduced to Henry Tilney, and Tilney is probably one of my favourite heroes of an Austen novel, quite honestly, because the way that him and Catherine are introduced to one another and the way they discuss and talk to one another is just so good. Like, I love the banter between them, and I love how funny he is. He is really funny. And he says things like, I say what you think of me, I shall make but a poor figure in your journal tomorrow. And Catherine's like, my journal? And he continues on, I was strangely harassed by a queer half-witted man who would make me dance with him and distress me by his nonsense. And Catherine's like, indeed, I shall say no such thing. And you can just see like the kind of back and forth between them, and I don't think I've ever seen such like an almost instant spark between a hero and a heroine in an Austen novel yet. I feel like Catherine and Tilney are definitely probably the most love at first sight, even though you don't really get, well, Catherine anyway doesn't really seem to show a lot of like heartfelt love or like that she's fallen for him just yet, but it is quite a friendly kind of introduction. They do hit it off from the get-go, which is a huge stark contrast to Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, but I absolutely adore Catherine and Tilney, honestly. So we also have John Thorpe and Isabella Thorpe. John Thorpe is a kind of another sort of love interest for Catherine, although he is honestly such a buffoon, and he is a little bit tyrannical, almost a little bit like a Gothic villain in the 1790s kind of Gothic books that I've read. And Isabella, his sister, is very selfish, but she is a great friend to Catherine to begin with, at least. Like, I love their friendship dynamic, because all they do really at the start, like is in chapter 6, they're talking about Udolpho, they're talking about reading this book, and Catherine is almost at the part with the veil, and you know, you see them discussing this book almost like a book club, almost like what we're doing right now, you know, and it's so relatable and so just endearing to see like the kind of connection you have with someone over reading a book, something that really takes over your life. You know, it's almost like reading Twilight in 2005, you know what I mean? Not that I ever did that, but yeah, they are just talking all about these books, and mainly Gothic books, and I love that Jane Austen does that with her heroines, and the way she shows like love and adoration for them, all the while satirizing them at the same time. Is that the right way of saying it? Satirizing them. But then, right, this might be a good idea for a future video, so let me know in the comments if you think this is a good idea. But when they're discussing more Gothic works, Isabella talks about these kind of like horrid books that Catherine should also read, and these are Castle of Wolfenbach, Clermont, Mysterious Warnings, Necromancer of the Black Forest, Midnight Bell, Orphan of the Rhine, and Horrid Mysteries. So I'm thinking maybe of doing a vlog like reading the 7 horrid novels mentioned in Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, because I was researching them, and I was researching the whole like horrid novels thing, and there are articles about it as well, because apparently these novels were very hard to find, and because back in that day when books would be released in volumes, like say Pride and Prejudice was released in 3 volumes, people would have like the first volume, someone else would have the second volume, and somebody else would have the third volume, especially if they were taken out of the library and things. So it would be very easy for books to be circulated but also lost, and in that case a lot of people thought that the novels here mentioned in Northanger Abbey didn't actually exist, and it took a long time for people to track them down, and I believe somebody did, and they have been published by a specific publisher. I want to read them. I want to read them and see what they're about, because I do love Gothic books. Gothic classics are my favourite. This is probably another reason why I absolutely adore this book, and how these Gothic books and reading these Gothic books makes the bond between Catherine and Isabella that much stronger, because I feel like a lot with my friends, we are bonded over books, and that is kind of like our kind of gateway into conversation sometimes. But I do absolutely love my friends on like say BookTube and the people I've met through BookTube, and I just love how books can really bring a community together. So even when Isabella's like, there is nothing I would not do for those who are really my friends, I had no notion of loving people by halves, it is not my nature, and I just love to say that. I love seeing Isabella and Catherine have this really strong friendship to begin with. Isabella does get a little bit off the rails, a little bit, but that makes her all the more interesting to read about. And I absolutely love that when you have finished Udolpho, we will read the Italian together. Now, I so much more prefer the Italian over Mysteries of Udolpho. I think this is so much better. I do love the flowery writing and descriptions of nature and things in Mysteries of Udolpho. It makes it so much more, I don't know, like gorgeous and beautiful, but it does make this overly long, and it's maybe a bit too long. But with the Italian, it just gets to the point most of the time, but it has such a fantastic story. It's gripping, it's dramatic. I need to reread this. I haven't reread it since university, so hopefully it still holds up. So then we come to John Thorpe. He was a stout young man of middling height who, with a plain face and ungraceful form, seemed fearful of being too handsome unless he wore the dress of a groom. And I absolutely love how much of an ass he becomes. Like, he's so obsessed with his horse, and then when Catherine is making conversation with him and talking about Anne Radcliffe or Udolpho, she says, "Have you ever read Udolpho, Mr. Thorpe?" "Udolpho? Oh Lord, not I. I never read novels. I have something else to do." But then he ends up saying, "Novels are also full of nonsense and stuff. There's not been a tolerably decent one come out since Tom Jones, which I haven't read and I kind of want to. Except The Monk, which I have read. I read that the other day, but as all the others, they are the stupidest things in creation." And then Catherine says, "I think you must like Udolpho," and he says, "Not I. No, if I read any, it shall be Mrs. Radcliffe's. Her novels are amusing enough. They are worth reading, some fun and nature in them." And then Catherine's like, "Udolpho was written by Mrs. Radcliffe." And he's like, "No, sure, was it? I remember, so it was." So like, he is dumb, and Catherine is so much smarter than him. And I just love that. I love that, because we do not ship John Thorpe and Catherine. We don't ship it. He does some really shitty things. Like, she wants to go on a walk later on, but he ends up kind of lying to her about the arrival of the person she's going to go on a walk on, so that she gets in a carriage with him to go to a castle which she's excited about. But then she passes the person who she's supposed to meet for a walk, and then she's like, "You lied to me, like, let me off," and he won't let her off. And it's just like, it's such tyranny, like, in a way, and it's just so silly. And I guess that kind of is where the satire comes from, because a lot of the Gothic novels that I read do have moments of absolute villainy from, you know, a lot of the oppressive guys in them, and sometimes I guess it's maybe a bit over dramatized in how dramatic it actually is. But I love how much satire and Gothic satire works in this novel's favour, but also how like it's a bit kind of modest in the first part, because it's not until we get to Northanger Abbey in the second part when we really get a glimpse into what an actual Gothic novel reads like. So skipping ahead to Northanger Abbey then, because I feel like I could just talk so much about pretty much nearly every chapter by itself, quite honestly. Right, okay, here's another bit. So Catherine, when she's talking about looking at the landscapes and things, she says, "I never look at it without thinking of the south of France." And Henry asks, "You've been abroad then?" And she says, "Oh no, only what I read about. It always puts me in mind of the country that Emily and her father travelled through in the Mysteries of Udolpho." And like, again, she brings up Udolpho, but she also brings up the fact that literally Anne Radcliffe's books, especially Mysteries of Udolpho, makes you think that you're there because they are so gorgeously described, a little bit like too well described almost, and it does take up a large chunk of the text that you do. I think as a modern reader you'd be like, oh, this is boring, but you do get a sense of the landscapes from her books, and it's pretty much like Catherine says, she almost convinces somebody else that she's been abroad to see these places because of how alive they are in Miss Radcliffe's books. But then Henry Tilney does say, I have read all Mrs. Radcliffe's works, and most of them with great pleasure, and I absolutely love the fact that they're bonding over Anne Radcliffe. Like, I love it so much. This is another reason why I think Catherine and Henry are my ship, my one true ship, or my one true pairing, or TP. But what is it the kids say these days? I don't know. Just because of just how much they have in common and how much they love Anne Radcliffe. Like, what a queen. What a queen. Okay, right, let's just go to Northanger Abbey, which is the Tilney house. Like, it's their estate. And while their Captain Tilney is he's the father of them, Catherine has the sense of gothic villainy from him as well. Like, she sees him as a gothic villain. She jumps to conclusions. This is where her imagination, like, really runs wild with her, especially since, like, she is in a setting of one of her novels, you know, and she is, like, a huge fangirl, and she is seeing everything as if it was a gothic novel, so she's jumping to conclusions. She's seeing things that aren't there, just like in a gothic novel, and she ends up coming across, and this is, like, hilarious, but she ends up coming across a black cabinet in her room, which is very reminiscent of coming across the black veil in The Mysteries of Udolpho. And while Catherine is looking through it, I mean, there is this whole, like, tension because the weather is bad outside and it's raining and it's dark and she has a candle and this mysterious object is in front of her and she doesn't know what's in it, and it's very tense and it has the whole, like, gothic suspense to it. And bear in mind as well, Henry has not helped her imagination at all, because on the carriage right there he tells her stories and she is like, oh no, do not say so. Well, go on. And it's like, she's like, no, I'm kind of scared by this, but also I'm, like, really interested in what you have to say because I love gothic novels, so please make me a heroine in a gothic novel. And that's exactly what it is. Her dreams are coming true, and I love that for her. So yes, she comes across this cabinet. It was so very odd after what Henry had said. A ball flew and she believed herself successful, but how strangely mysterious. The door was still immovable. You know, her heart beats quicker, her courage doesn't fail her, and then she opens it and it's empty. And then she opens different compartments and each of them are equally empty. Not one of them was left unsearched. And then she comes across a roll of paper and her feelings at the moment are indescribable. Like, she's like, okay, I'm on the precipice of something amazing here, something terrifying, like this huge secret's about to be revealed. And then her candle flickers out and then it's snuffed out and it's extinguished and she cannot see. So she has to wait until the morning to read what it is, prolonging this suspense. And then she looks at it and it turns out to be a washing bill. It turns out to be a washing bill. That's what it is. That was what this huge kind of suspenseful moment was leading up to, was her finding this washing bill. It's hilarious. And again, it kind of goes to that whole, like, way of how gothic novels can really build you up, and then sometimes it can be so misleading that nothing actually happens, and so you're kind of left a little bit deflated from a reveal, maybe. And I feel like that's exactly what Jane Austen was going for with the Black Cabinet, trying to make the readers of gothic novels think of, like, how much the heroine is in distress through their own imagination more than what is actually happening. So Catherine's imagination is something that I do admire her imagination, even though it gets her into a bit of trouble because she then suspects the General Tilney to have murdered his wife 9 years before, even though he didn't. But, like, she is kind of, like, really suspicious of him because he's acting a little bit like a gothic villain, you know, he's moving about quite suspiciously and he's pacing back and forth and he's very mysterious and quiet, and also he doesn't, like, treat people very well. So she kind of paints this picture of him through what she's read in gothic novels. It just comes to a head and she realises that that's not the case. He didn't kill his wife, and she's just, well, she ends up looking like Lord Twat of Nobbington Manor. I love this. I love it. There is, of course, always so much more to talk about with these Jane Austen books, but I don't want this to be way too long. So I did mainly want to talk about the gothic element of Northanger Abbey. I mean, there's so much more I could say about the gothic element of Northanger Abbey and how much it satires, like Anne Radcliffe, for instance. But I feel like through that satire, Jane Austen shows such an appreciation and love for the Gothic, and it makes me love Jane Austen even more, because she's appreciating a genre of books that in that time was sometimes looked down upon, and, you know, a lot of people didn't think favourably of Gothic fiction. So I feel like this really does highlight just how engrossing Gothic fiction can be and how much it can play with our imagination, how much it can stimulate our senses. I love it. I love what Jane Austen did with it. I really do. So I'm going to give this one 5 stars. It is a fantastic Jane Austen book. Like, I think so underappreciated, so overlooked. So this was like the last official kind of full main novel that I had to read for this vlog, which makes me a bit sad, but I do still have 3 more to read. A couple of them unfinished. One of them, Lady Susan, is epistolary. So this is kind of a big moment for me, knowing that I've read all of Jane Austen's main works, and it makes me so happy because she has not done me wrong. Jane Austen is brilliant, a genius, incredible. I love her. Wish I'd got to know her. I'm so sad it took me this long to read them all. Oh my lord, I've just discovered, well, one, that my baby's sitting right here because I love you. Yes, I do. I was just about to get my Kindle so that I could read Lady Susan, right? But it's actually included at the start of Sanditon. In fact, not just Lady Susan, but the Watsons as well. Lady Susan, the Watsons, and Sanditon are all in this. I had no idea, and I got the Kindle version so that I could read it. Oh, this is awesome. This is absolutely awesome. So that means all I've got left to read in this vlog is this. It's this. It's tiny. It's tiny. And this is all of the ones I need to read. Wow. Wow. Let's go and read Lady Susan then. This is such a nice surprise. Lady Susan is once again not like all those other Jane Austen girlies. I've been saying this all along, just how different each Austen heroine has been. And I'm holding up Sanditon, but again, this has like Lady Susan in it, so that's why I'm holding it up. But yes, she is just... What? But yeah, Lady Susan, she blew my mind. Like, she is a bit of an anti-heroine. She is a little bit of a villain, I guess, which made her all the more interesting to read. I love it when we follow a sort of villain character, because Lady Susan, she... Well, this novel is told in letters, where you have Lady Susan corresponding with different people, as well as different people corresponding with each other. So we have Lady Susan write letters to, like, pretty much her best friend, as well as her brother or brother-in-law and sister-in-law. And her sister-in-law really doesn't like Lady Susan, so her sister-in-law is called Catherine, and she is so against Lady Susan because Lady Susan was married to Mr. Vernon, and Mr. Vernon had a brother who was Lady Susan's brother-in-law, and then her brother-in-law married Catherine, becoming Lady Susan's sister-in-law. But Lady Susan didn't want them to be married. She did try and stop it from happening, and Lady Susan gets a bit of a cold reception from Catherine, and Lady Susan even says, "When we consider that I did take some pains to prevent my brother-in-law's marrying her, this bond of cordiality is not very surprising, and yet it shows an illiberal and vindictive spirit to resent a project which influenced me 6 years ago, and which never succeeded at last." So Lady Susan does acknowledge that she tried to prevent the marriage from happening, and you know what, if I was in Catherine's position, I would also hate Lady Susan, because if somebody tried to get in the way of me marrying the person I love, then that person will be written out of my life forever. But Catherine can't get rid of Lady Susan that easily. Lady Susan is so kind of renowned in her society. She is such a flirt. She is quite an attractive but older lady, is in like her late 30s. And to me, that isn't an older lady, but it is sort of comparing her to other Jane Austen heroines, as well as in the time period as well. Because yeah, instead of following a young heroine, as we usually do with Jane Austen's books, we're following an older lady. She is a widow and she has a 16-year-old daughter. And her daughter was called Frederica, and Lady Susan is trying to get Frederica to marry... What's his name again? Honestly, there's just so many names to remember. It was like Sir something. The person who Lady Susan ends up marrying herself. Yes, this is another messy book. Sir James Martin, and Frederica does not want to marry him, and she is very melancholy about it. So then Catherine, Lady Susan's sister-in-law, sees that happening. She thinks Lady Susan is a terrible mother, and there are all these correspondences between characters, and the majority of them just don't like Lady Susan. Okay, this is where I'm getting a little bit confused. I mean, just because, like, again, like, these kinds of stories do confuse me a little bit, but Lady Susan is sort of flirting with... what's his name? It begins with an R. Because everyone seems to be called like Mr. and then their last name rather than their first name. Is it Reginald? Yeah, it's Reginald. And Lady Susan has kind of bewitched him into being on like her side. So even though people are telling Reginald that Lady Susan is a bad character, Reginald is still kind of almost infatuated with her. She is gorgeous, she is beautiful. Even though she is an older woman, she is still a lot more fairer and a lot more beautiful than her own daughter. So people do, well, especially men, seem to fall under her charms. So Lady Susan has managed to like manipulate Reginald quite a bit, and her daughter has actually fallen in love with Reginald. So by the end of the book, her daughter marries Reginald, and Lady Susan marries Sir James Martin, I think his name was, even though he was the one that she was trying to get her daughter with. So again, it's like very messy. It's really messy. But yeah, you do get an insight into how people really don't like Lady Susan. Lady Susan seems to have her own reasons for not liking people. And yeah, I did enjoy it. It is entertaining. I do wish this was like a fully fledged novel rather than just a series of letters. I find reading books or epistolary novels a little bit hard to get into. I read The Appeal by Janice Hollett earlier this year and really didn't like it. That's told through emails, and that book bored me to tears. I mean, this is so much shorter. This is only like 70 pages, but it was still entertaining enough because I was interested in what was going on between the characters, how they were corresponding. I think Jane Austen really did it very well, and she portrayed it very well, the different connections each person had, and the kind of scandals and drama that was happening between them. So I'll give Jane Austen props for that, because she made an epistolary novel quite entertaining for me when usually they don't entertain me at all. And Lady Susan is just like a great character to read. I just wish it had been like a 300-page novel of her scheming and getting on everyone's nerves, more so than just a 70-page epistolary novel. So I'm gonna give it 3 stars, I think. I think 3 stars is pretty fair, especially since, again, like, it's very short, and I think even with the word count, with the page count that it has, it still managed to convey quite a lot of entertainment factor. And this might have been one of the first books that Jane Austen ever wrote, because I recall somebody saying that it was written like maybe in the 1790s and then not published until the 1870s, decades after Jane Austen died. Maybe if Jane Austen had lived a bit longer, she might have returned to the manuscript of Lady Susan and made it into a full-fledged novel. I think she did that with Sense and Sensibility, actually. And I love Sense and Sensibility. I genuinely think this could have become one of my favourite books had it been just a normal novel. But alas, some things were just not meant to be, unfortunately. And now I wish Jane Austen had lived to 100 so we could have got 500 more amazing novels from her, but life is cruel. The Watsons is only around about like 50 pages, so it was very, very easy to read and get through. It was rather confusing, though at times I couldn't really follow it, just because, like, especially at the start, there are 4 daughters, right? And they're all Miss Watson. So when there is a Miss Watson talking, I actually don't know who is talking. So I think at the start, so we are introduced to Emma Watson. She is our heroine, not the actress. She is just, well, she reminded me of Fanny Price, really. And I think Jane Austen, when she was writing this, kind of borrowed a lot of the elements of the characters, or at least like the vibe of the characters in her later works. So I feel like Emma felt a little bit like Fanny Price from Mansfield Park, because Emma is like very nice, and she does some like really nice things in the very short time of this novel. Right, okay, I'm gonna probably get something wrong here, because again, it was very confusing. Emma is the youngest daughter of the Watsons. She has 3 older sisters and she has 2 brothers. And Emma was living with an aunt, but her aunt married her second husband, so Emma went back to the Watsons. Now, they're not a very rich family by any means. They are rather poor, and they are invited to a ball that, well, they're regularly invited to a ball, but because they live so far out, they have to stay at someone else's at the time of this ball so that they can make it to this ball. And at this ball, they meet the Osbornes. Well, Emma meets the Osbornes for the first time, who are this like really wealthy and important family in this community, in this society. And Emma attracts the attention of quite a few suitors. So we have Tom Musgrave, who, this is where I'm confused, because I think it's Elizabeth. Again, like at the start, it's Miss Watson was telling Emma all of this, but she says something about how her older sister Penelope ruined the relationship between Elizabeth and Tom. However, Elizabeth wanted to marry Purvis, but then Penelope ended up marrying Purvis instead. So that left Tom a free man, but Elizabeth never went back to him. And anyway, Tom is a bit of a scoundrel himself. He sees, young women and he kind of pursues them. He takes an interest in them, but he isn't ever really serious, or at least that's what I think it's Elizabeth, tells Emma. Yes. At this ball, Emma ends up attracting the attentions of like Lord Osborne, who is a bit of a Mr. Darcy kind of character. He isn't very likable to begin with, but then again, neither was Mr. Darcy. There was some like a little bit of attraction there. There is also, Tom, who again attracts the attention of Emma. And yeah, he seems a little bit Willoughby-esque, I guess. And then we also have Mr. Howard, who reminded me a little bit of Colonel Brandon. He's like a very nice guy. There's nothing wrong with him. He's just nice. There is like a bit of there's kind of 3 of love interest for Emma, which I found really interesting, and I did really like that. And as I said, I really do like Emma as a character. She's a great sort of role model, I guess. She, at this ball, she approaches this 10-year-old kid who was disappointed that Miss Osborne wasn't going to dance with him. So Emma is like, hey, I will dance with you. And she dances with him. And she ends up attracting the attention of the people around her, including the potential suitors. So her kindness to this boy is something that really, well, propels the plot forward after that. But then it doesn't really go too far because then the story ends, which honestly, it would have been great to have seen that develop. But yeah, I think maybe Jane Austen saw more potential in it in other stories. I don't know. But it was nice to read, and I'm quite glad I read it. It added to the Jane Austen canon. I probably will only give this like 2.5 stars. It's very underdeveloped, of course, because it's unfinished, so I can't really hold that against it. But I guess in just terms of overall enjoyment, it was like teasing. It was very teasing, but it just didn't go anywhere, if you know what I mean. So, of course, it's going to be the lowest rated in this vlog, which I feel bad for. I wish Jane Austen had finished it, I really do. And this wasn't one that she wrote at the end. I think it's Sanditon was the one she wrote before she died and couldn't complete. The Watsons, I think she just abandoned. She was just like, I'm not doing this anymore, because she wrote it before Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice and all of that. I think, anyway, as I said at the start of this vlog, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I don't know what I'm talking about half the time. So not a terrible book, honestly. Jane Austen cannot write a terrible book. It was just that its life was cut a bit too short and we couldn't get anywhere with the story, really. I don't think there's anything too much more to say about it. I was, again, like really intrigued by the sisters and the bond of sisters, because it seems like there was a lot of drama between them, especially Penelope and Margaret or Elizabeth, one of them. I don't know who it was, but 2.5 stars, and unfortunately my least favourite Austen, but my least favourite Austen is still better than some other authors' works. It has that going for it. I've spent all day reading Jane Austen's final works, well, final for this vlog, plus the final one that she wrote, which was Sanditon. Spent all day reading Jane Austen. The sun is setting and I am ready to tell you my thoughts on the final book I read, as well as my overall ranking and opinions on Jane Austen's books. So Sanditon, I really do wish that Jane Austen had lived long enough to finish this, because this had probably one of the best openings of a Jane Austen novel, in my opinion, because we start off with Mr. and Mrs. Parker, and they are in a carriage that flips over. Like, it's very dramatic, and it was very exciting to read, and even though Mr. Parker only suffered from a sprained ankle, it was still quite exciting compared to other Austen openings. So then we end up getting introduced to the Haywoods, and they look after Mr. and Mrs. Parker, and Mr. and Mrs. Parker go back to Sanditon, which is like I love the way Sanditon is described. This is how my brain works. With classics, I try and liken them to more contemporary things so that I can understand them better. So like, say for Sense and Sensibility, I saw Frozen, for instance. But in Sanditon, I could kind of see a little bit of like Desperate Housewives, like Wisteria Lane kind of vibes, because the way Sanditon is described in such a beautiful kind of way, it also sounds like a lot of stuff happens in Sanditon. So then we have Mr. Parker say, everybody's heard of Sanditon, the favourite for a young and rising bathing place, certainly the favourite spot of all that are to be found along the coast of Sussex, the most favoured by nature, and promising to be the most chosen by man. It is precluded by its size from experiencing any of the evils of civilization, while the growth of the place, the buildings, the nursery grounds, the demand for everything, and the sheer resort of the very best company, whose regular, steady, private families of thorough gentility and character, who are a blessing everywhere, excite the industry of the poor, and diffuse comfort and improvement among them of every sort. So Sanditon seems to be more like the main character of this, rather than any particular person. Although we do get introduced to Charlotte Haywood, who goes with Mr. and Mrs. Parker to Sanditon to experience it. And yes, Charlotte Haywood, I think, if the novel had have been written more of, and we got more of a look into the lives of the characters, I do think Charlotte would have been the main character, the heroine. But I feel like Sanditon is like the main character and supposed to be like the main character of this book. And I love the fact that we had that, and I genuinely wish we could have visited Sanditon more. And we do get to Sanditon. It does sound like such a cool place. We get introduced to, like, say in chapter 3, every neighbourhood should have a great lady. The great lady of Sanditon was Lady Denham. So like, we have this like older lady. She is kind of caring for Clara, who is rather poor, but Lady Denham is rich and Clara is kind of staying with her. So like we do have those characters, and if we had have had more, we would have had more depth and exploration of them. I'm not too sure of who the hero of the story is, quite honestly. I don't know like who Charlotte would have ended in love with. I just think that this had such huge potential, and it's such a shame that it didn't really go much further. There wasn't really a plot to this. It really was just the introduction of this place of Sanditon, which I feel like is its own character. So yes, I couldn't really like pick too much more out of it. I did feel a little bit emotional as I got to the very end of the book, and I got to like the last words. It was impossible not to feel him hardly used, to be obliged to stand back in his own house and say the best place by the fire constantly occupied by Sir Harry Denham. And that is the final words Jane Austen wrote. And that is rather sad. And it doesn't sound like I'm sad, but I am. I was sad when I first read it. I was more sad then. But, you know, it was great. It was a great book, but unfortunately didn't have the breadth or depth of Austen's other works, obviously, because it's just a fragment of a novel. So in that regard, it will only get 2.5 stars as well, the same as the Watsons, because I think we didn't get enough, which of course is the case, and I do feel bad for giving it such a low rating, but it wasn't terrible. It was very promising. It piqued my interest. Would love to have seen more of Sanditon and found out more about the characters and everything that they entailed. But definitely, I think my favourite start to a Jane Austen novel, which doesn't make this the worst Austen novel which I read in this vlog. Something else was coming bottom, but it wasn't enough to really put itself with the other books. Of course, like I do feel bad saying this, and you're going to say this in the comments as well. Well, obviously it doesn't because it's unfinished. I know this. I genuinely know this, but reviewing just what I've got, reviewing this, well, less than this, it was only like 50 pages, it didn't hit the heights of the other works of Jane Austen. Anyway, that is my thoughts on Sanditon. Let's get into the rankings. Yeah, this is like all of Austen's works then, because Lady Susan and the Watsons were included in this, as well as Sanditon, so that's 3 in 1 right there. So this is everything I read in this vlog, absolutely everything, and it's quite a chunk, and I'm so proud and so happy that I read them all. So how would I rank them? Let me just go over this and sort it out. And I won't go too much into my thoughts on each one because I do have this whole vlog talking about every single one in depth. So if you have just skipped to this part to see my ranking, if you want to know my thoughts on each of the books, timestamps down below are your friend. Okay, in at number 9 will be The Watsons, which is included in this collection. And then in number 8 is Sanditon, which is included in this part as well. And in at number 7 will be Lady Susan, which again is included in this collection. So that's my bottom 3, which I feel like because Lady Susan is a history and not really my thing, and Sanditon and the Watsons are unfinished novels, it makes sense that they are bottom of this ranking, for me anyway. I know a lot of people do love Lady Susan, and Lady Susan was a great read, and Lady Susan is a fantastic character, but just the novel format wasn't really for me. So that's why it is in at number 7. So then, Jane Austen's actual finished complete works, her main 6, I should say. In at number 6 is Mansfield Park. I think this is my least favourite Jane Austen, mainly because of its length. It went on a bit too long, even though I do love Fanny as a character, and I did enjoy the story more as it went on. Part 1 did kind of drag it down for me, but then we did get into more of a better story, as well as a great look into the characters later on. So fortunately, Mansfield Park is my least favourite of the Jane Austen main novels. In at number 5 is Persuasion, which was the first book I read in this vlog, and nothing wrong with this book at all. In fact, I enjoyed it immensely. The length of it was perfect. I loved Anne and Captain Wentworth, and I loved how their relationship was and how that was explored, but not my favourite among the other Jane Austen books, which again, timestamps below if you want to know why. And in number 4 is Pride and Prejudice. Now, I genuinely thought I would love this a lot more than I did. Unfortunately, it was majorly boring for me, especially the first half of this, and I didn't like Mr. Darcy to begin with, which I don't think you were supposed to, but as soon as I started to fall in love with Mr. Darcy, and I got to see the relationship between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy blossom and grow, I started to like this a whole lot more. So yes, I didn't love it as much as everyone else, and coming in at 4th place does disappoint me, quite honestly. Like, this is probably my most disappointing Jane Austen book, whereas even though like Mansfield Park came bottom, I didn't have the highest expectations with Mansfield Park as I did with this. So who knows, maybe a few more rereads, I might enjoy this more, I might appreciate it more. So yeah, so far it's at number 4. And at number 3 is Sense and Sensibility, and I genuinely loved this one. I thought it was rather dramatic, and it had a lot of scandal in it, and I loved the relationship between Marianne and Eleanor, and I thought it was just great and such an entertaining read. Loved it from from start to finish. It wasn't boring to me in the slightest, even though there were like dull moments, of course. I feel like every Jane Austen book has dull moments, but you need those moments to kind of break up everything else that happens around it in order to develop characters, to show character connections, and to understand families a bit more and what their goals are. I think Sensibility had a great balance of the dull and the exciting, I guess, is how I want to put it. But yeah, really enjoyed this one, and I was so surprised by how much I enjoyed it. So yeah, number 3 for Sense and Sensibility. I kind of struggled with my top 2, but at the same time, I did have a runaway favourite. But in at number 2 is Northanger Abbey, and this one is so looked down upon. It is so underappreciated. It is fantastic. Absolutely love it. The excitement of this one was brilliant. The way it introduced the Gothic in Jane Austen's world was fantastic. Love the kind of references to other Gothic classics and the way it is utilised in the story in order to help progress Catherine. And I love Catherine as a character. She's one of my favourite main characters or main heroines in an Austen novel, and it was just great. I loved it. The length is perfect too. I love the shorter Austen novels. It just didn't quite make my number 1. And I don't really know what it would have had to have done to be my number 1, because as I said, the length is perfect. It didn't need to go any longer. I don't know. It's fantastic. I think more people should love it, but they don't. Which means in at number 1 is Emma. And I thought this would always be number 1. It is a reread for me, as Northanger Abbey was. But I always knew I loved this one. I always knew it was 5 stars. I love the humour of it. I love Emma as a character. She really propels the story forward. And she is just fantastic to watch throughout this entire thing. Even though it's one of Jane Austen's chunkier novels, it still managed to keep my interest the entire way through and was just so engrossing. Oh, I just love it so much. Definitely my favourite Jane Austen, and even though it was a little bit close between this one and Northanger Abbey, I just feel like this one had such great development, such great comedy, and is Jane Austen's best work, in my opinion. Of course, in my opinion. And you can disagree, you can absolutely disagree. Let me know your rankings in the comments below. I'd love to know what your favourite and least favourite Jane Austen books are, how you would rank these novels, because yeah, everyone I think is just so different in their taste in Jane Austen. I guess it depends on what you look for when you're reading Jane Austen, whether you want the comedy, you want the romance, you want the character, you want everything else in between. It depends on what you want that I think affects your ratings of Jane Austen. But I feel like there is definitely a Jane Austen book for everyone, and I've learned that in this vlog. But honestly, I was genuinely pleasantly surprised by how much I adored the rest of Jane Austen's works. So as I said, I'd only read Emma and Northanger Abbey from before, as well as Persuasion, but I couldn't remember reading it because I read it for uni. So really, I reread 2 of those books and then read for the first time the other 7. And as much as I thought I wouldn't really love the unfinished novels, I did still find enjoyment in them, as well as in Lady Susan, which is an history novel. I didn't think I would love it, and I didn't love it, but I did like it. And here are the books like Pride and Prejudice. I'm so glad I read. As bored as I was to begin with, it was such a great read, and I'm so glad I read it and can say that I read it. And just everything in between as well. It was just a great experiment for me. Am I a Jane Austen stan now? Yes. Yes, I am. I think Jane Austen is wonderful and brilliant, and I do wish that she'd lived longer so that she could have released more amazing books. I feel like 6 full-length novels was not enough for, you know, the genius and the amazing writings of Jane Austen. She could have done so much more, and I could have imagined how Sanditon could have gone. It could have probably been my favourite by the end of it. We unfortunately had to say goodbye to Jane Austen too early. So a huge thank you for watching my Jane Austen vlog. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't already. A huge thank you again to the sponsor of this video, Babbel. Don't forget that you can get 60% off your subscription by clicking the link in the description box down below. And another huge thank you to my patrons for supporting my channel and making this content possible. If you would like to join my Patreon or follow me on any social media, then all the links are down in the description box. I'm hoping to do more videos like this in the future, where I pick a whole author's catalogue and read them in one video. So let me know if you have any suggestions in the comments below, and hopefully I will see you in the next video. Bye.